Chapter 1790. 100 Soldiers. Zhuowen's expression changed slightly. He did not expect that there would be a divine sense in a place like this. Moreover, this divine sense was not weak at all. Which fellow Daoist dares to trespass into my Huaxia continent? The moment this divine sense swept over, an extremely unfriendly voice sounded out. As soon as this voice came out, that divine sense was like a sword, fiercely thrusting over. It was extremely impolite. Zhuowen narrowed his eyes and snorted coldly. His divine sense transformed into countless ropes and bound the sword-shaped divine sense layer by layer. Then, with a sudden squeeze, the sword-shaped divine sense directly collapsed. This divine sense was not very strong. It should be around the early stage of the Earth Immortal stage, but Zhuowen's cultivation had reached the middle stage of the Earth Immortal stage. Moreover, under the effect of his Dao intent, his divine sense was infinitely magnified. A mere early stage Earth Immortal divine sense really could not affect him at all. What? The moment the sword-shaped divine sense shattered, the owner of the divine sense let out a muffled groan and revealed a shocked and furious voice. The mortals below did not notice the collision of the two divine senses at all. However, the collision of the divine senses swept up an extremely terrifying gale in the sky. As soon as this gale came out, it caused many mortals below to involuntarily shiver and hurriedly enter their own houses. The couple in the small courtyard also felt this gust of cold wind. The two of them leaned against each other and entered the house. Zhuowen looked at the couple who had already entered the house with some reluctance. Then, he sighed softly and his divine sense began to slowly dissipate. "I wonder when I will be able to return." A faint voice sounded in the air. In the end, Zhuowen's divine sense disappeared. The moment Zhuowen's divine sense disappeared, a long rainbow flew over from the horizon and instantly arrived at the place where Zhuowen's divine sense was. This person was dressed in a white robe and looked to be in his 40s. He was standing on a flying sword. At this moment, his face was slightly pale and there was a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth. He muttered to himself in fear, who was the owner of that divine sense just now? He's actually so powerful and so unfamiliar. He's definitely not a cultivator from the Huaxia continent. Just who is he? This person racked his brains but had no clue at all. Moreover, he also knew that Zhuowen had already shown mercy in that exchange just now. If Zhuowen had really hardened his heart, he was afraid that he would have suffered more than just minor injuries. Let's go back and report this to the sect leader. The person shook his head. With a stomp of his right foot, he instantly disappeared. The strange thing was that many of the mortals below didn't notice him at all. It was as if the middle-aged man was transparent. Zhuowen slowly opened his eyes. What appeared before him was still a mountain, a Daoist temple, and an old Daoist. At this moment, the old Daoist priest looked at Zhuowen with a smile and said, "Little friend, have you traced back to the origin?" Zhuowen looked deeply at the old Daoist priest in front of him and said in a deep voice, "Who are you?" The old Daoist priest laughed and held the bamboo slip in his hand. He said with a smile, "It seems that you have traced back to the origin. It's really good that you can enter the threshold of Dao will. This kind of thing is illusory and 1 in a billion. You can really comprehend it, which shows that you're extraordinary." At this point, an invisible ripple spread throughout the entire space. Then, Zhuowen was pushed back and flew out. Then, he saw that the mountain and the Daoist temple were collapsing. In the Daoist temple, the old Daoist priest was still holding the bamboo slip. A green ox appeared under his feet. It rose into the air and slowly walked away. In Zhuowen's eyes, the green ox was walking very slowly. However, every step it took was hundreds of millions of miles. It was as if the earth was shrinking into an inch. "Haha. Little friend, if there's a chance, we'll meet again. Take this. It's my token. If you're lucky enough to reach the soul formation stage and obtain the astrolabe, you'll be able to travel through the starry sky. At that time, you can come to the summer region to find me." The old Daoist priest's laughter kept echoing in Zhuowen's ears. Then, a ball of purple gas appeared in his hand. This ball of purple gas was only the size of a thumb. It was obviously in the form of mist, but when Zhuowen touched it, it felt like a round bead. Riding a green ox out of seclusion, Zhuoan rubbed the purple gas in his hand. His eyes became brighter and brighter. He suddenly thought of a character in the ancient legends of his previous life. This person was the founder of Taoism, Lao Tzu. Whoosh! The moment the mountain and the Daoist temple disappeared, the invisible ripple appeared again. If Zhuoan were in the outside world now, he would be extremely shocked. At this moment, the surroundings of the ancient boulder Zhuoan was on were practically filled with a terrifying white light. This white light was getting denser and denser, stronger and stronger. At the instant the white light was dense to the limit, it actually started to merge into a ball and started to ceaselessly wriggle. In the end, an enormous arched door appeared in the sky. This is the door of profundity. Do Hua's pupils constricted as he abruptly stood up and stared fixedly at the arched door in the sky. It wasn't only him, the 10+ heavenly immortal realm experts on the meditation mats were unable to sit still as well. They stood up one after another and stared dumbstruck at the arched door. Even though they'd never comprehended Tao insight, they'd read about it in the ancient books. The door of profundity would appear when one comprehended Tao insight. This door of profundity was extremely profound, and it was said that one would be able to comprehend Tao insight after stepping into this door. Shiji's eyes narrowed as he stared at the door of profundity in the sky with a complicated expression. It said that one would be able to comprehend Tao insight after stepping into the door of profundity. He Wushang's gaze burned as he stomped on the sky with his right foot, and he was actually the first to leap up and flash towards the door of profundity. It wasn't just He Wushang, the Beast Envoy clan's ancestor, Wei Wuyin, pondered for a short moment before following closely behind He Wushang. Besides these two people, the gazes of the other heavenly immortal realm experts and master of the battlefield flickered, yet they didn't make any rash movements. Even though they coveted the Tao insight extremely, they were comparatively wiser and were able to sense the formidable aura emitted from the door of profundity. He Wushang instantly flashed to arrive before the door of profundity, and the burning desire in his gaze had reached the limit. After that, he took a step forward with the intention of completely stepping into the door of profundity. Bang! But at the instant He Wushang took a step forward with his right foot, an extremely strong feeling of danger instantly surged into his heart. Within the door of profundity, countless white lights surged and converged before transforming into an enormous palm. The striations on the surface of this palm were clear and lifelike, and it was like the palm of a real person. Especially the aura that effused out from the palm was extremely vast and terrifying. At the instant this palm appeared, the feeling of danger in He Wushang's mind had already reached its peak, and then he shouted furiously as he instantly retreated explosively repeatedly, and he didn't dare approach the door of profundity. Unfortunately, this palm seemed as if it had locked onto him. Swoosh! It gave rise to boundless violent winds that instantly flashed explosively towards He Wushang, and its speed was so swift that it far exceeded He Wushang's expectations. Damn it! He Wushang shouted furiously as he flicked his sleeve. Instantly, countless weapon images flashed out explosively from his sleeve, and they suddenly blasted onto the palm. Unfortunately, this palm was too terrifying. At the instant the weapon images came into contact with the palm, they instantly collapsed, and it terrified He Wushang to the point of shuddering with fear. Wei Wuyin, who was originally following closely behind He Wushang, naturally saw this scene as well. Without even thinking about it, he immediately retreated, and he had no intention of helping He Wushang resist this palm. He Wushang naturally saw this scene as well, and he cursed inwardly, but there was nothing he could do. Although he had some friendship with Wei Wuyin, it was impossible for Wei Wuyin to help him at such a critical moment. The price to pay was simply too great. Blade, sword, spear. He Wushang clenched his teeth and formed a seal with his right hand. Instantly, 3 gusts of wind appeared around him. These gusts of wind contained the shadow of a blade, the shadow of a sword, and the shadow of a spear. The power they produced was terrifying. The 3 violent winds whistled as they fiercely blocked in front of He Wushang. The boundless sharp aura could pierce through the heavens and earth, and cause the sun and moon to dim in comparison. Unfortunately, the palm was only blocked by the 3 violent winds for a moment, and the surface of the palm emitted extremely dense, invisible ripples. This invisible ripple spread out, layer upon layer, and the surrounding space collapsed and collapsed because of it. The three storms, which were originally fierce and frightening, suddenly came to a halt when the invisible ripple spread over. Subsequently, they shattered like glass. He Wushang's heart shuddered as he watched, and he felt bitter in his heart. He did not expect the door of profundity to be so terrifying, and the giant palm that was formed from it was so strange. His attack was like tofu, and it did not hinder it at all. Swoosh! The giant palm swept out again like a hot knife through butter, and blasted in front of He Wushang. He Wushang no longer held back, and he took out a ball of black gas from his spiritual ring. This ball of black gas was surrounded by countless phantoms. If one looked carefully, these phantoms were mostly in the form of various weapons, and they looked extremely strange and terrifying. What was even more strange was that the aura within the black gas was extremely vast and terrifying. When everyone looked at it, they only felt their hearts beat faster, and their minds trembled. It could be said that this black gas was not simple. The heavenly immortal saint artifact of the Wang Ren clan, 100 soldiers. Do Hua's eyes narrowed, and he revealed a trace of interest. It is said that this 100 soldiers was formed from the saint artifacts of the previous patriarchs of the Wang Ren clan. It contains hundreds of weapon souls, and it can change the shape of the weapon at will. It can be considered as a supreme item among the earthly immortal saint artifacts. The other ancestors also discussed. Without a doubt, the heavenly immortal saint artifact, 100 soldiers, in He Wushang's hand, should be quite famous among the crowd. Otherwise, it would not be able to cause such a lively discussion. 100 soldier war soul. He Wushang roared angrily, and his right hand grabbed the black gas. Immediately, the black gas began to grow several feet long. On the surface, it looked like a rod, but it was not a rod, and it looked like a spear, but it was not a spear. Especially the phantoms around the 100 soldiers, as he grabbed them, they directly spread out. Chapter 1791. The Path of Life and Death. He Wushang roared furiously as he held the 100 armaments in his hand, and then he stretched out his right hand. Instantly, the countless war souls around him seemed as if they'd gone mad, and they transformed into a black ray of light that flashed directly towards the enormous hand that came from the door of profundity. Bang! 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 However, when the black ray of light collided with the enormous white hand, numerous explosions resounded. The black ray of light was directly suppressed by the enormous white hand, yet it didn't shatter because of this. He Wushang's face flushed red as a trace of blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth, and then he couldn't help but retreat explosively. Even if he'd utilized the 100 armaments, he'd actually still been completely suppressed by the enormous white hand, and this had simply exceeded his expectations. At this moment, he felt bitter in his heart, and he regretted overestimating his ability and wanting to step foot into the door of profundity. After all, it contained the energy of the Heaven Tao, and it wasn't something he could enter as he pleased. Rumble. The enormous white hand suddenly slapped down, causing the black ray of light to directly collapse, whereas, He Wushang let out a muffled groan as he spat out a mouthful of blood, and then he retreated explosively once more. He Wushang's expression changed, and he looked towards Do Hua and said in a low voice, "Divine Master, lend me a hand." The gaze of the Divine Master that was originally observing from the central Divine Palace flickered as he nodded, and then he said to the Dao Tai below the central Divine Palace, "Help him." The Dao Tai seemed to have understood Do Hua's words, and it roared as it put down the central Divine Palace, and then it flashed towards the enormous white hand with its right foot. The Dao Tai was simply too huge. With every step it took on the ground, it would cause the ground to emit an extremely terrifying explosion sound. Wherever it stepped on, the ground would split apart. It looked extremely terrifying and ferocious. Bang! The Taotia's speed was extremely swift, and it instantly flashed before He Wushang. It suddenly opened its mouth, and a strange black hole actually appeared within its mouth. This black hole was extremely deep, and it seemed as if it could swallow everything in the world. The enormous white hand flashed over and descended onto the black hole, and its forward momentum actually stopped because of this. Bang! 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 Terrifying explosions resounded from the Taotia's body, and then strands of terrifying bloody mist erupted from the Taotia's body. After that, the Dao Tai let out a shocking sorrowful cry. However, the Dao Tai was not an ordinary creature. Although it had suffered serious injuries, the large white hand had completely stopped moving in the strange black hole. Whoosh! The large white hand suddenly pulled itself out of the black hole and returned to the door of profundity. Awoo! Dao Tai cried out as if it had been wronged. Then, it landed in front of the Divine Lord and whimpered. Do Hua's eyes were calm. He waved his sleeve and took out a large number of celestial desire fruits. The Dao Tai swallowed fiercely, and the grievance in its eyes immediately disappeared, revealing a satisfied look. Moreover, this Dao Tai was extremely unusual. Although it was severely injured by the big white hand, the injuries on its body looked extremely ferocious and terrifying. However, Dao Tai was completely unaware. Moreover, the frightening injuries on Dao Tai's body were continuously healing at a speed visible to the naked eye. The strength of this beast's physical body had definitely reached an unprecedented level. Thank you, Divine Master. He Wushang cupped his fists gratefully. Do Hua nodded and said, the door of profundity isn't something we can touch. Let's wait and see. He Wushang was stunned, and then he revealed an embarrassed expression. However, he didn't say anything and returned to the meditation cushion once more. His gaze changed indeterminately as he looked at the door of profundity and the figure with his eyes closed tightly below it. Suddenly, Zhuowen opened his eyes, and then he took a few steps back. His gaze descended onto the door of profundity in the sky, and his gaze revealed an expression of understanding. Withdraw. Zhuowen waved his sleeve, and a shapeless ripple stretched out from his sleeve and instantly enveloped the entire door of profundity. This shapeless ripple was precisely the energy of the Tao insight that Zhuowen had comprehended. At the instant it came into contact with this shapeless ripple, the door of profundity suddenly trembled, and then it shrunk into a ball before transforming into a ray of light that flashed out explosively and directly entered between Zhuowen's brows. At this moment, Zhuowen's eyes were brilliant like the stars. The strand of Tao insight he obtained this time was sufficient to advance his half-step Tao insight to the first-level Tao insight. According to the records in the ancient books, if one wants to comprehend Tao insight, doesn't one directly step into the door of profundity? Why didn't this kid enter the door of profundity earlier? Could it be that he failed? Do Hua's eyes narrowed as he stared fixedly at Zhuowen who was below him. At this moment, he was able to sense an extremely strange fluctuation ripple on Zhuowen's body. This fluctuation ripple was extremely obscure, yet it gave him a rather strong feeling of threat. There were numerous ancient books within the Chaos Temple, and there was no lack of books that introduced Tao insights. The door of profundity was the foundation for comprehending Tao insights. During the ancient times, monstrous geniuses were born in large numbers, and it wasn't that there weren't any that comprehended Tao insights. After the door of profundity appeared, those monstrous geniuses resolutely stepped into the door of profundity because only in this way would they be able to completely comprehend the true profundity of Tao insights. But Zhuowen's current situation caused Do Hua to be inconceivable. Zhuowen had clearly comprehended Tao insight and summoned the door of profundity, yet this kid didn't choose to enter the door of profundity. Moreover, the door of profundity transformed into a ball of light that entered between this kid's brows in the end. What exactly is going on? Could it be that this kid failed to comprehend Tao insight this time? It wasn't just Do Hua, the other heavenly immortal realm experts had faces filled with bewilderment as well. Obviously, they were unable to see through the scene from before. Only Shiji's eyes flickered with bright lights as he seemed to have thought of something, and he fell into deep contemplation. At this moment, the commotion on the ancient boulder had already gone completely silent, and it wasn't in a state of uproar and disorder like before. On the other hand, Zhuowen stood silently before the ancient boulder like a bamboo that stood proudly there. Everyone in the square stared at Zhuowen with reverence. Without a doubt, the commotion caused by Zhuowen in the third level was absolutely even more sensational than the previous two levels, and even the heavenly immortal realm experts were alarmed. At this moment, there were numerous questions in Zhuowen's heart, and he muttered, Huaxia Sky Region? Zhuowen, have you comprehended Tao insight? Do Hua's gaze flickered, and he asked this question in the end. Zhuowen raised his head to look at Do Hua and said calmly, Lord Divine Master is knowledgeable about both ancient and modern times, so you ought to be even clearer about Tao insight than me. I presume Lord Divine Master has guessed whether I've comprehended Tao insight or not, right? Do Hua's brows knit together slightly as he said, according to the ancient books, one must enter the door of profundity to completely comprehend Tao insight, but you haven't. As soon as these words were spoken, the atmosphere in the surroundings became much more relaxed. The meaning behind Do Hua's words was extremely obvious. Even though Zhuowen had summoned the door of profundity, he hadn't truly comprehended Tao insight. If Zhuowen had really comprehended Tao insight because of this, then it would really cause a mighty uproar here. Zhuowen's gaze was calm, and he didn't admit nor deny it. On the other hand, Zhuowen's silent appearance was naturally taken as a form of tacit agreement by everyone. The third level, the Heaven Pass, had ended, and only a little over 100 people remained amongst the 800 participants in the Battle of Gods. Do Hua floated above the central divine hall and looked down at everyone below him as he said in a low voice, 99 chaotic war gods will be conferred during the Battle of Gods this time. All of you only have 156 people remaining now. If you want to obtain the title of chaotic war god, then you must enter the top 99. As he spoke, Do Hua gestured with his right hand and put away the ancient boulder, and then he stomped his right foot on the ground. The enormous Dao Tai beneath the central divine hall suddenly roared, and then it opened its bloody mouth and spat out. A strand of black light flashed over, and it formed a black hole that revolved without end. This black hole was deep and terrifying to the point it seemed bottomless. The Battle of Gods this time is divided into 3 levels, 2 Daos, and the first is to enter the ancient times. The first 3 levels are the heaven, earth, and dark barriers, and the second is the Daos. There are 2 paths within this black hole, and these 2 paths are respectively divided into the path of life and the path of death. The path of death is at the front, and the path of life is at the back. Only by traversing the path of death will one be able to obtain the path of life. As he spoke, Do Hua clawed with his right claw. Instantly, an extremely terrifying aura of death swept out from within the black hole. This aura of death was extremely dense, and merely sensing it from afar caused one's entire body to go cold and shiver. Putting one's life on the line? Zhuowen's eyes squinted as he stared at the black hole that was releasing dense aura of death, and he muttered in a low voice. The moment the black hole formed, at the entrance of the central divine hall, an elegant figure slowly walked over. This figure was filled with willful confidence and unruliness. His shoulder-length hair and fluttering sleeves gave this person a free and easy charm. Yuan Hongwen. The moment this figure slowly flashed over, it instantly attracted the attention of countless gazes on the square, and it even set off an uproar. The divine child, Yuan Hongwen, who descended from the heavens. Regardless of whether it was the experts of the same generation or the older generation, his name was like thunder in their ears. Swoosh! Yuan Hongwen walked over slowly, and finally stopped above the black hole. Then, he arrogantly looked down at the people on the square below. After that, he turned around and cupped his fists at Do Hua, and said loudly, "Greetings to the Divine Master and ancestors." As expected of the divine child that descended from the heavens, Hongwen is becoming more and more like a supreme expert. In the future, it won't be a problem for him to break through to the heavenly immortal realm. It's even possible for him to become a true immortal. He Wushang nodded and praised. Not only he Wushang, but the other heavenly immortal ancestors also couldn't help but praise. Although it was just some pleasantries, Do Hua was rather pleased in his heart. After all, Yuan Hongwen was personally cultivated by him. Hongwen had already passed the 3 trials of heaven, earth, and profound before the Battle of Gods. That's why I didn't let him come out to test this time. I believe everyone won't blame me for this, right? Do Hua smiled. The other heavenly immortal ancestors naturally waved their hands. They naturally wouldn't go into a dead end over such a small matter. In the square, Zhuowen's gaze fell on Yuan Hongwen, and he couldn't help but frown. The aura on Yuan Hongwen's body was much stronger than when he saw Yuan Hongwen in the Crystal Tower. Yuan Hongwen's cultivation had even reached the late stage of the earthly immortal realm. It looked like the Divine Master, Do Hua, had spent quite a bit of effort on Yuan Hongwen during this period of time. Moreover, for some unknown reason, Zhuowen actually sensed the aura of Dao insight from Yuan Hongwen. However, this aura was very faint. If it wasn't for the fact that Zhuowen had comprehended Dao insight, he probably wouldn't have been able to sense this faint aura. Chapter 1792. Death Aura. There are a total of 99 people in this path of life and death. If you want to obtain the title of Primal Chaos War God, then you must walk out of the path of death and arrive at the path of life and death. As Dohua spoke, he waved his sleeve once more, and a white hole appeared not far away from the black hole. White mist lingered within the white hole, and it was utterly impossible to see what was within the white hole. However, the white mist within the white hole was filled with dense and exuberant vitality. Obviously, this white hole should be the exit of the path of life. Then everyone can begin now, Dohua said indifferently. As soon as he finished speaking, Yuan Hongwen stepped into the black hole without the slightest hesitation. The moment Yuan Hongwen entered the black hole, his gaze faintly fell on Zhuo Wen, who was not far away, as if he had not noticed. Zhuo Wen glanced deeply at Yuan Hongwen's figure that had entered the black hole, and he revealed a contemplative expression. Even though Zhuo Wen had already comprehended half-step Dao insight, whereas Yuan Hongwen had merely touched upon Dao insight, Zhuo Wen still didn't dare underestimate this person. After Yuan Hongwen entered the black hole, numerous figures behind him also entered the black hole like locusts. My lord. At this moment, Bai Qing arrived behind Zhuowen while feeling slightly ashamed, and he opened his mouth and stuttered. Zhuowen glanced at Bai Qing. He knew that the reason for Bai Qing's shame was probably because he didn't pass the third stage. He persisted for 10 breaths of time before the ancient boulder, yet he still wasn't able to light up the ancient boulder and was eliminated. It's fine. You should have benefited greatly from the celestial pool during this battle of gods. I'm afraid you should have a great chance of breaking through to the quasi-immortal realm, right? Zhuowen waved his hand. Bai Qing nodded, and his gaze revealed a trace of excitement. Although he didn't obtain any benefits from the ancient boulder, merely the celestial pool in the second stage had given him an extremely great fortune. After staying in the celestial pool for 20 breaths of time, the immortal qi he absorbed was sufficient for him to break through to the quasi-immortal realm. Now, he only needed to find a place to cultivate quietly for a period of time, and he would naturally be able to become a quasi-immortal realm. After dismissing Bai Qing and having him wait outside the plaza, Old Man Zhu and Xue Hui arrived together. Xue Hui and Old Man Zhu's luck was pretty good. In the third trial, the ancient boulder test, the two of them managed to light up the ancient boulder at the critical moment of the 10th breath. The path of life and death this time is full of danger. Your life is the most important thing. If you really can't do it, giving up is a wise choice, Zhuowen said calmly. Old Man Zhu Shong and Xue Hui looked at each other with hesitation. I still want to give it a try. The opportunity to participate in the battle of gods is hard to come by. I don't want to give up just like that. Xue Hui gritted his teeth and said resolutely. Old Man Zhu's eyes lit up. He was still a bit hesitant, but in the end, he clasped his hands and said, I'm also willing to try. Zhuowen smiled. This is how a martial artist should be. Let's go. With that, Zhuowen took a step forward with his right foot and shot into the black hole like a rainbow. Old Man Zhu Shong and Xue Hui followed closely behind. Not long after, the remaining 156 people had all entered the path of life and death. The attention of the rest of the people in the plaza fell on the white hole. They were filled with anticipation and speculation as to who would be the first to rush out. Yuan Hongwen is a god's son from the heavens. He is invincible among his peers. Even the experts of the older generation are no match for Yuan Hongwen. This time, Yuan Hongwen should be the first to rush out of the white hole. That might not be the case. Zhuowen's performance in the first 3 trials was so shocking. I'm afraid he might not be weaker than Yuan Hongwen. Perhaps the first to rush out might be Zhuowen. Not only were the juniors in the plaza looking at the white hole, but even the old ancestors and Dohua, who were sitting cross-legged on the futons, were looking at it with anticipation. Dohua, now that the path of life and death is over, Are we preparing to open the ancient battlefield? Shiji's eyes flickered as he asked Do Hua. Do Hua nodded and said, yes, this matter cannot be delayed any longer. The ancient battlefield must be opened. The 4 battlefields and the shattered skull abyss are all ready. Now, only the Nether Corpse Extremis remains. I wonder if the Lord of the Divine Tomb of the Nether Corpse Extremis will agree to open the ancient battlefield. Do Hua felt a little helpless when he said this. Although he had never seen the Lord of the Divine Tomb of the Nether Corpse Extremis, he had faintly sensed the aura of the Divine Tomb when he had gone to the Divine Tomb region. The aura was so terrifying that even he felt apprehensive. At that time, he had wanted to negotiate with the Nether Corpse Extremis about the ancient battlefield. Unfortunately, the Lord of the Divine Tomb did not respond to him at all. The Lord of the Divine Tomb ruled the entire Nether Corpse Extremis. Without the Lord of the Divine Tomb's consent, he could not mobilize the Nether Corpse Extremis at all. Moreover, among the 6 danger zones, the Nether Corpse Extremis was actually the most unfathomable danger zone. Moreover, the Nether Corpse Extremis contained the majority of the origin energy of the ancient battlefield. Without the Nether Corpse Extremis, the success rate of opening the ancient battlefield would be very low. The Lord of the Nether Corpse Extremis is an old friend. Shiji's gaze suddenly became complicated, as if he was reminiscing about something. He said in a deep voice, after this is over, I will personally talk to that old friend of mine. The only way to uncover the truth of the ancient times is to open up the ancient battlefield. I believe that old friend knows this better than I do. Do Hua's eyes lit up with joy when he heard Shiji's words. The reason he was so accommodating to Shiji was not only because he feared Shiji's strength, but also because Shiji was acquainted with the Lord of the Divine Tomb. With Shiji's relationship, Do Hua should be very confident in mobilizing the Nether Corpse Extremis. If Brother Shi's persuasion is successful, I will definitely hand over the remaining ancient texts in the Chaotic Temple to Brother Shi. However, Brother Shi must be mentally prepared. Although the ancient texts are still here, they are too damaged. I'm afraid you might not be able to understand them, Do Hua said hesitantly. Shiji nodded, it's fine. The ancient texts are only one of my goals. The ancient battlefield is my final goal. I will be able to find the truth and the source of the calamity from back then there. Do Hua's eyes flickered as he nodded, but he did not answer Shiji. In the pitch-black space, there was an endless amount of mist, which contained an extremely dense death aura. The instant Shuwen stepped into the black hole, he found himself in such an environment. Moreover, the deathly aura was like maggots in a tarsal bone, surging towards him in succession, attempting to burrow into his body through all the apertures on his body. Death, Zhuowen allowed the surrounding deathly aura to burrow into his body without stopping it at all. Zhuowen was very familiar with this deathly aura. He had comprehended the laws of death in the second forbidden area of the 3rd layer. The second forbidden area's environment was somewhat similar to this place, but the deathly aura here was much denser than the second forbidden area. The moment the deathly aura burrowed into Zhuowen's body, invisible ripples spread out from Zhuowen's body. Under the effect of the invisible ripples, the deathly aura shook and surged into the invisible ripples like a cat that had tasted blood. Tao follows nature. Everything contains the Tao, and this deathly aura is no exception. Moreover, my Tao insight contains a portion of the laws of death, so I'm probably even closer to this deathly aura. Zhuowen smiled faintly as he strolled leisurely through this space filled with the aura of death. If anyone else saw this, they would definitely be dumbfounded because they had tried every means to resist the deathly aura after entering this place. Moreover, every step they took was difficult, but Zhuowen was actually so relaxed. He was not affected by the deathly aura at all. Zhuowen looked at the surroundings and noticed it was pitch black, causing his brows to knit together slightly, and he didn't see the figures of Old Man Zhu and Xue Hui. Looks like entering this place is probably random. Otherwise, it would be impossible for Xue Hui and Old Man Zhu who entered with me to be separated from me. But this place is extremely strange, and my divine sense is actually unable to detect the distance to this place. Zhuowen frowned slightly as he spoke in a low voice. Let's go deeper. It's impossible that there's nothing here. As he spoke, Zhuowen raised his right leg, and then he was like a ray of light that instantly vanished on the spot. Moreover, Zhuowen noticed that when he circulated his Dao insight, the surrounding deathly aura seemed to be seething as it suddenly poured into his body and fused into the Dao insight he absorbed from the door of profundity earlier. It wasn't just that, along with the deathly aura fusing into his Dao insight, Zhuowen noticed that his comprehension towards Dao insights was slowly speeding up. Zhuowen knew that he would be able to completely comprehend this Dao insight in a few days, and at that time, he ought to be able to smoothly attain first-level Dao insight. After he experienced this sort of benefit, Zhuowen's gaze was filled with excitement, and he simply let go of all restraints and started to fearlessly absorb the terrifying deathly aura in the surroundings. If someone saw Zhuowen's appearance at this moment, the person would surely be greatly shocked because the deathly aura around Zhuowen surged, and the deathly aura was like a storm that bore into Zhuowen's body successively, causing it to form a black-colored storm that ceaselessly roiled around Zhuowen. Because the deathly aura around Zhuowen was truly too much, even with divine sense, it would probably be difficult to detect the true appearance of Zhuowen within the deathly aura. The speed of the black-colored storm was extremely swift, and it flashed forward like a shuttle. After around the time for half an incense stick to burn, Zhuowen noticed that an iron chain bridge had appeared before him, and there was boundless black water beneath the bridge. If one looked carefully, one could notice that numerous white-colored skeletons were floating within the black water, and these skeletons had savage appearances and didn't move in the slightest. At the instant Zhuowen arrived at the entrance of the iron chain bridge, he noticed that there was a figure that was ceaselessly moving forward at the center of the iron chain bridge. Moreover, along with the process of this figure moving forward, the skeletons beneath the bridge actually moved abruptly, and they actually flashed out of the water and flashed towards this figure. A cold snort sounded out from this figure, and then countless illusory weapons appeared around this person. There were all sorts of sabers, spears, and swords as they whistled past, and it was extremely terrifying. For a time, it blocked off all the skeletons that flew over from the surroundings. Chapter 1793. Against He Yu. Who else could it be other than He Yu, who was in the middle of the iron chain bridge and wielding countless illusory weapons? At this moment, He Yu's brows were slightly knitted. Both of his hands were continuously forming seals. Countless illusory weapons circled behind him like a gust of wind, resisting the horrifying corpses that were rushing towards him. In addition, He Yu also needed to divide a portion of her strength to resist the surrounding aura of death that was like maggots in the bones. This death chi was very troublesome. If it entered the body, the celestial core power would immediately be unable to circulate smoothly, which would greatly affect the display of one's strength. Just as He Yu was dealing with the skeletons and death chi around him, he seemed to have sensed something. His divine sense suddenly extended towards the entrance of the iron chain bridge behind him, and he immediately discovered a figure surging with death chi. The moment he saw this figure, He Yu couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. The death aura around this figure was too dense. Even his divine sense couldn't penetrate the surging death aura and see the true appearance of the figure inside. Moreover, He Yu also noticed that the figure seemed to be absorbing the terrifying aura of death around it. Is this person crazy? He's actually absorbing the death chi. Isn't he afraid that the death chi will affect his immortal essence circulation? He Yu's eyes were filled with doubt. However, he did not intend to provoke this person. After all, this person was too strange. Moreover, he had already crossed 2/3 of the iron chain bridge. There was still 1/3 left. Naturally, he could not provoke this strange person at this critical moment. Third. Suddenly, the figure at the entrance of the iron chain bridge stepped onto the iron chain bridge and walked towards He Yu at an extremely fast speed. He Yu naturally saw this scene. Soon after, his pupils shrunk slightly as he discovered that this figure was extremely fast. The many strange skeletons in the black water did not launch any attacks wherever it passed. It was as though they were dead objects. What the hell is this? An ominous feeling rose in He Yu's heart. Without hesitation, he increased his speed and rushed towards the other end of the iron chain bridge. Not long after, He Yu arrived at the other side of the metal chain bridge. Just as he let out a sigh of relief and was about to turn around to see where the figure was, he heard a terrifying sound of something breaking through the air behind him. Whoosh! He-Yu's gaze darkened. Without even thinking, he stomped his foot and countless weapon shadows began to gather behind him, forming an extremely terrifying defensive barrier. Bang! The piercing sound arrived in an instant and heavily blasted on the defensive barrier. Following which, the defensive barrier emitted a series of explosive sounds. Following which, He-Yu's pupils shrank as she involuntarily retreated. Soon after, he saw that on the surface of the defensive barrier, the figure whose entire body was shrouded in death aura had his right palm firmly pressed against his defensive barrier. "Who are you?" He-Yu's eyes were gloomy as he asked coldly. However, the only response he got was silence. The figure shrouded in death aura snorted coldly. He formed a seal with his right hand, clenched his fist, and smashed it on the defensive barrier. Instantly, the sound of glass shattering could be heard, and the defensive barrier collapsed. He-Yu's gaze was gloomy. With a flick of his finger, he immediately took out a long sword. The surface of the sword was engraved with countless runes. As soon as it was taken out, a sharp aura gushed out and formed sword shadows around He-Yu. The sword was called the Celestial Slaying Sword, and it was He-Yu's natal earthly god saint artifact. Moreover, the Celestial Slaying Sword had been strengthened by He Wushang's King Blade Sacred Talisman. The power of the Sacred Talisman was much stronger than other earthly god saint artifacts. As soon as the sword appeared, the surrounding deathly aura started to churn and formed into the shape of a sword. A sharp aura shot up to the sky as if it wanted to cut the sky apart. Celestial Slaying Slash. He-Yu's gaze was cold. With the Celestial Slaying Sword in his hand, he took a step forward and slashed the sword down. Rumble. In an instant, the surrounding deathly aura was suddenly lifted by the aura of the immortal slaughtering sword, forming a vacuum of several hundred feet in the surroundings. The immortal slaughtering sword was like a bright star as it swept over, aiming straight for Zhuo Wen's heart. Zhuo Wen, who was in the middle of the death aura, narrowed his eyes and looked at He-Yu's attack with surprise. The power of the Celestial Slaying Sword was indeed terrifying. It was even more terrifying than his 5 birds seal. However, Zhuo Wen was not afraid. He took out the 5 birds seal and formed a seal with his right hand. Suddenly, giant beasts in the form of a tiger, deer, bear, ape, and bird rushed out from the 5 birds seal. Moreover, Zhuo Wen had even added half-step Dao insight into the 5-fowl seal, causing the might of the 5-fowl seal to rise to the limit. Its aura was actually not the slightest bit inferior to the immortal slaughter sword. Rumble. The two immortal artifacts collided with each other, and then an extremely terrifying clanging and exploding sound instantly arose from the collision while a shapeless wave of air spread out towards the surroundings. Fortunately, this place was enveloped in the death aura all year round, causing it to be perfectly silent. Even though the collision of the two immortal artifacts was extremely terrifying, it didn't cause too much of a commotion in this space that was filled with death aura. He-Yu frowned slightly as he stared fixedly at the 5 birds seal, and then he suddenly raised his head and shouted furiously. 5 birds seal? You're Zhuo Wen? Even though Zhuo Wen hadn't used the 5 birds seal during the Battle of Gods, He-Yu had investigated Zhuo Wen in the past, so he naturally knew everything about the earthly immortal artifact, the 5 birds seal, in Zhuo Wen's possession. Zhuo Wen's gaze was ghastly. He knew that He-Yu would recognize him sooner or later, so he wasn't very surprised. He-Yu had been targeting him since the beginning, and he had mocked and ridiculed him many times. Zhuo Wen had tolerated this person for too long, and what was worse was that this person had even asked his ancestor, He Wushang, to attack him, a junior. It could be said that Zhuo Wen's killing intent towards He-Yu had already reached its peak, and today was his chance. He wouldn't give up until he killed He-Yu. He-Yu, let's end our enmity here and now, Zhuo Wen said coldly, and then he waved his sleeve. Instantly, the death aura around him suddenly swept and collapsed, revealing Zhuo Wen's cold figure. At this moment, Zhuo Wen's eyes were overflowing with killing intent, and his celestial core power lingered around him. When he took a step forward, the entire space seemed to be under his feet, and it exploded with a rumbling sound. Rumble. Zhuo Wen's speed was extremely fast, and he instantly swept out of the 5 birds seal and flew towards He-Yu. His aura erupted, and even He-Yu's expression changed. That's what I was thinking. Die. He-Yu's eyes were gloomy, and he also abandoned the celestial culling sword and swept towards Zhuowen. After all, the celestial culling sword and the five-bird seal were in a deadlock, and he couldn't withdraw it at this moment. Slaughtering underworld finger. Zhuowen snorted coldly, and directly used the immortal technique, slaughtering underworld finger. Countless underworld water droplets were exposed from his body, and then gathered under his feet to form a huge yellow finger that was a few 100 feet long. The yellow finger was extremely lifelike, as if it was a real person's finger. Under Zhuowen's control, it broke through the air and blasted towards He-Yu. Immortal technique, saber, spear, sword shadow. He-Yu snorted coldly, and his right hand grasped the void. Suddenly, his surging celestial core power transformed into a huge saber shadow. After the saber shadow was formed, it was followed by a sword shadow and a spear shadow. The three shadows had a terrifying size of a few 100 feet, and they turned into three long rainbows that swept over violently. Bang! The saber shadow was extremely fast. It broke through the air and stood on top of the slaughtering underworld finger, and immediately froze the slaughtering underworld finger in mid-air. At the same time, the spear shadow and the sword shadow were like two shuttles, sweeping over from two different directions, sandwiching Zhuowen between them. If nothing unexpected happened, these two phantoms were enough to crush Zhuowen to death. Zhuowen's eyes were cold. He suddenly formed a seal and used the immortal technique, solitary peak. The solitary peak, which was tens of thousands of feet long, fell from the sky and heavily smashed on the spear and sword shadows. Now, Zhuowen's cultivation had reached the late stage of the Earth Immortal realm, and the celestial core power in his body was much more powerful. The solitary peak he used was many times more powerful than before. Bang! 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 The solitary peak fell and smashed on the spear and sword shadows, and immediately froze the two weapon shadows in place. Zhuowen took advantage of this opportunity to step in front of He-Yu. He clenched his right fist and directly used the 9-cycle golden crack runes. 9 golden runes revolved around his right arm, and then he directly blasted out a punch and heavily smashed it in front of He-Yu. He-Yu's face was gloomy. He flipped his right hand, and instantly, countless weapon shadows started to converge in front of him and actually formed an enormous stone tablet that was tens of meters tall. If one looked carefully, the enormous stone tablet looked like a sharp sword, and it blocked in front of Zhuowen just like that. At the same time, after He-Yu used the sword-shaped stone tablet, he immediately retreated. His gaze was serious because he was able to sense that Zhuowen's aura was too terrifying at this moment, and it caused him to tremble with fear. Rumble. With a punch, the sword-shaped stone tablet actually shattered, and it caused He-Yu's pupils to constrict as he took another step back. Zhuowen sneered repeatedly. Invisible ripples suffused his feet as he immediately used the half-step Dao Insight. After that, his entire body slowly vanished on the spot. At the instant when He-Yu saw Zhuowen vanish, his pupils couldn't help but constrict. He recalled the terrifying speed that Zhuowen revealed during the celestial pool test, and a bad premonition arose in his heart. Swoosh! At the instant that bad premonition arose in He-Yu's heart, a terrifying sound of the sky being torn apart flashed out from behind him. He-Yu didn't even think before he directly clenched his right fist and blasted out a punch as well. Crack! At the instant that He-Yu's fist collided with Zhuowen's fist, a clear and melodious sound of bones breaking resounded out. After that, He-Yu suddenly let out a shrill cry as he clearly felt that the bones in his right arm were completely shattered. Moreover, this sort of shattering wasn't ordinary shattering, it was complete shattering. Even if his cultivation had attained the advanced stage of the earthly immortal realm, it was still difficult for him to heal and repair this sort of destructive shattering. This obviously showed how terrifying the might of Zhuowen's punch was. Retreat. He-Yu was astounded in his heart, and he didn't say anything as he directly retreated explosively. Zhuowen was truly too terrifying, and the strength of his body had far exceeded his imagination. Chapter 1794. First level Dao Intentuowen's speed was too fast. Before He-Yu could react, Zhuowen had already appeared behind him. Especially when Zhuowen swung his fist. The power contained within it was destructive. If he was hit in the back, even if he didn't die, he would be skinned alive. King Blade Saint Talisman. Without hesitation, Hiyu used a trace of the King Blade Saint Talisman's origin. The origin of the King Blade Saint Talisman was separated from the Saint Talisman by the royal Blade clan's ancestor, He Wushang. He gave it to Hiyu so that he could have a life-saving technique. Clang! A talisman suddenly appeared behind Hiyu. The talisman was engraved with runes in the shape of a long sword. The moment the talisman appeared, countless saber lights and sword shadows flashed around the talisman. Then, these saber lights and sword shadows condensed into a heavy great sword. The moment the great sword appeared, the surrounding space collapsed, forming countless cracks and fragments. Just by floating in the air, the surrounding space was already unable to withstand it. Rumble. Zhuowen's fist arrived as expected and smashed onto the great sword. Then, Zhuowen was shocked to find that his fist couldn't shake the great sword at all. Instead, he was pushed back by the sharp aura on the surface of the great sword. You forced me to use the King Blade Saint Talisman. You must die. Hiyu's eyes revealed a ferocious expression. His right hand drooped down as if it had no bones. It looked extremely strange. He knew that the bones in his right hand were completely shattered. Moreover, this kind of shattering was destructive. Even a heavenly immortal would find it difficult to put the shattered bones back together. He knew that his right hand was completely crippled, so his hatred for Zhuowen was monstrous. Thinking of this, Hiyu waved his left hand. Suddenly, a gust of wind rose around the great sword. Then, the sharp tip of the sword pointed at Zhuowen. With a whoosh, the great sword pierced through the air and ruthlessly stabbed towards Zhuowen. Zhuowen's eyes were indifferent, but the corner of his mouth was filled with a cold smile. He said, "Saint Talisman? You're not the only one who has it." As he spoke, Zhuowen's eyes became strange. His left eye contained countless flames, while his right eye emitted endless cold. Two extreme energies appeared in Zhuowen's eyes, making Zhuowen look very strange. Then, Zhuowen grabbed at his eyes with his right hand. Suddenly, the ice and fire energies in his eyes were grabbed by his hand. The two energies merged in front of Zhuowen and finally formed a fiery red and icy blue glyph. It was the glyph of the holy glyph of ice fire. Ice flame holy symbol. Hiyu's eyes narrowed as he stared at the ice fire saint symbol. His eyes were filled with shock. He hadn't expected that Zhuowen would also have a saint symbol. Moreover, it was the Icefire Saint symbol of the Icefire clan. No wonder Jiang Zhe hated Zhuowen so much. It turns out that part of the Icefire Saint symbol's origin is in his body. Hiyu's eyes flickered as he muttered to himself. Zhuowen's eyes were calm as he pointed his sword finger in the air. An invisible ripple enveloped the surface of the Icefire Holy Talisman. Instantly, the Icefire Holy Talisman seemed to have been injected with chicken blood, and waves of terrifying ice and fire energy gushed out from it. The ice and fire energies covered the sky and the earth. They formed a giant hand and grabbed the sword. What? Caught! This Icefire Saint symbol is only a strand of origin. How can it be stronger than my King Blade Saint symbol? Hiyu was shocked and couldn't help but exclaim. Zhuowen sneered in his heart. The Icefire Saint symbol that was supported by Dao Will was not simple. Moreover, Hiyu's King Blade Saint symbol was only a strand of origin. In theory, the difference between the two was not big. Unfortunately, Zhuowen had the power of Dao Will. Keep. Zhuowen's eyes were cold as he controlled the Icefire Saint symbol. The giant hand of ice and fire squeezed and grabbed the sword. Then, like catching a chicken, he handed the sword to Zhuowen. Zhuowen didn't hesitate to use the devouring curse to seal the King Blade Saint symbol. He then kept it in his spiritual ring. Fart. Hiyu spat out a mouthful of blood. He glared at Zhuowen and said, "Zhuowen, how dare you steal my Wang Ren clan's Wang Ren Saint symbol?" "You, what about me?" Zhuowen didn't care about the flustered Hiyu. His right hand grabbed at the void. The giant hand of ice and fire pierced through the void and appeared in front of Hiyu in an instant. "Zhuowen, you will regret this." Hiyu screamed and immediately bit the tip of his tongue. A cloud of blood mist spurted out from his body. Then, like a blood arrow, Hiyu disappeared on the spot. His speed was so fast that even Zhuowen couldn't react in time. What kind of secret technique did he use? Zhuo Wen furrowed his brows and felt a little helpless. After all, He was a core member of the Wang Ren clan. With the background of the Wang Ren clan, it was not strange for He Yu to possess such a powerful secret technique. However, this secret technique can increase one's speed so quickly. I'm afraid the side effect is huge. Even if He Yu is lucky enough to escape, his cultivation will be greatly reduced. When I meet him again, I can kill him with a flip of my hand. A cold smile appeared at the corner of Zhuo Wen's mouth. Soon after, he waved his sleeve and once again absorbed the surrounding deathly aura into his body. His figure was faintly discernible under the shroud of the deathly aura. At the same time, Zhuo Wen put away the five-bird seal and the celestial slaughtering sword. He Yu was in too much of a hurry to escape. He didn't even have time to keep his earthly immortal saint artifact, the immortal slaughtering sword, which benefited Zhuo Wen. The immortal slaughtering sword contained He Yu's natal brand. With Zhuo Wen's current cultivation and strength, it wasn't difficult for him to remove it. Therefore, he separated a part of his divine sense to remove the natal brand from the immortal slaughtering sword. At the same time, Zhuo Wen took out a trace of the origin of the Wang Ren saint talisman. His eyes flickered as he whispered, "Legend has it that the 9 great saint talismans can fuse together to form the legendary divine talisman. It is said that the divine talisman has layers of mysterious power. I have 3 saint talismans on me now. Although they aren't complete saint talismans, they have all inherited the power and characteristics of their respective saint talismans. I wonder if these 3 saint talismans can fuse together." Zhuo Wen's eyes flickered as a strange idea suddenly appeared in his mind. He really wanted to know what would happen if the 3 saint talisman origins were fused together. The more Zhuo Wen thought about it, the more excited Zhuo Wen became. He couldn't help but summon the 3 saint talismans. He stared at the 3 saint talismans. The wind and thunder saint talisman flickered with lightning, the ice and fire saint talisman intertwined with ice and fire, and the Wang Ren saint talisman had the shadow of a weapon. The 3 saint talismans had 3 different characteristics. Taking a deep breath, Zhuo Wen slowly fused the 3 saint talismans together. What surprised Zhuo Wen was that when he fused the 3 saint talismans together, the 3 saint talismans actually repelled each other. "It seems like it won't work," Zhuo Wen said with a wry smile. Right when Zhuo Wen was about to give up, the energy of Tao insight within his sea of consciousness suddenly flashed out explosively, and it instantly enveloped the 3 types of saint talismans. Zhuo Wen also noticed this scene, and his eyes immediately lit up with interest. After being enveloped by the Tao intent, the 3 saint talismans began to fuse together. During this time, they even burst out with a myriad of colors, but they were all covered up by the Tao intent. Under the influence of the Tao intent, the 3 saint talismans were like obedient children. They didn't resist at all and fused together. The moment the 3 saint talismans fused together, a surge of energy that seemed to trace back to the origin suddenly burst out from the 3 saint talismans. Zhuo Wen was very familiar with this energy. He had sensed it once in the ancient boulder. The moment this energy burst out, Zhuo Wen's eyes revealed a trace of understanding. Subsequently, Zhuo Wen sat cross-legged on the ground and began to comprehend the mysterious energy produced by the fusion of the 3 saint talismans. Due to the surrounding deathly aura, Zhuo Wen wasn't afraid of being discovered at all. Time passed slowly, and Zhuo Wen discovered that this mysterious energy had the same effect as the Tao intent. As he continued to comprehend, his understanding of the Tao intent also reached a deeper level. 3 days later, Zhuo Wen suddenly opened his eyes. Around him, invisible ripples spread out in all directions like a vast ocean. Its vastness was much greater than the ancient boulder from before. Rumble. As the invisible ripples spread out, the surrounding deathly aura suddenly surged and rolled, forming an extremely vast and terrifying deathly aura storm. Zhuo Wen stood tall and laughed heartily at the sky. His laughter was filled with carefreeness and joy. His laughter contained a strange ripple. This ripple soared into the sky and caused the clouds to surge. It was as though a new era was occurring. I actually reached the first level of the Tao intent because of this. What a pleasant surprise. Zhuo Wen calmed down, and the corners of his mouth curled up slightly as he chuckled. The fusion of the three saint talismans actually produced a resonance with the power of the Tao intent, which promoted the progress of Zhuowen's comprehension of the Tao intent. In the end, his half-step Tao intent was promoted to the first level of the Tao intent. The first level of the Tao intent was enough to double Zhuowen's overall strength. This was an extremely terrifying ability. Zhuowen's combat strength was already sufficiently terrifying. If his combat strength was doubled again, and it was an overall increase, perhaps even a peak earthly immortal wouldn't be a match for Zhuowen. After calming down, Zhuowen's gaze quickly fell on the saint talisman before him. At this moment, the three saint talismans had already disappeared and merged into an extremely peculiar talisman. This talisman not only flickered with lightning, but it was also suffused with blade shadows, and even had ice and fire revolving. It could be said that this talisman had merged the characteristics of the Wind and Thunder Saint Talisman, the Ice Flame Saint Talisman, and the Kingblade Saint Talisman. This wasn't the main point because Zhuowen felt a vast and terrifying origin energy within this talisman. This origin energy could quickly cause Zhuowen to fall into a state of enlightenment. It could be said that this origin energy was absolutely a priceless treasure. Chapter 1795. Primordial Origin. At this moment, Zhuowen was overjoyed. He knew that with this trace of primordial origin, his comprehension ability would be greatly boosted. It seems like only by gathering 3 or more holy talismans can the holy talisman origin resonate and fuse together to produce primordial origin. It's a pity that the 3 holy talismans you've obtained only contain a trace of origin. What you've fused together is only a trace of primordial origin. Xiao Hei's silhouette slowly appeared in front of Zhuowen as it lamented. However, Zhuowen smiled and said, "This trace of primordial origin is already very beneficial to me. At least with this trace of primordial origin, I can see the path ahead." Xiao Hei nodded. This primordial origin was too little and could not help Zhuowen forcefully increase his realm. However, Zhuowen could rely on this primordial origin to see further and higher. This would undoubtedly allow Zhuowen to take fewer detours in his future cultivation. "Let's go. I want to see how long this path of death is." Zhuowen laughed loudly and took a step forward. Like a shuttle, he instantly disappeared from where he stood. In the darkness far away from Zhuowenji, a figure stopped in a dilapidated black building in an extremely wretched state. This person's clothes were tattered and his right hand was hanging on the ground as if it had no bones. This person's gaze was extremely cold as he said hatefully, "Remember this, Zhuowen. If I don't take revenge, I won't be a member of the Wang Ren clan." "Brother He, what's wrong with you? Why are you in such a sorry state?" Suddenly, a somewhat lazy voice sounded out, causing the miserable figure to tremble all over. Then, he abruptly turned around and stared fixedly at a spot not far away. Outside the dilapidated building, there was a small pitch-black path. At the end of the path, a figure slowly walked over. This person was middle-aged and had a large eagle with sharp eyes standing on his shoulder. At this moment, he was staring at He Yu, who was in a sorry state. He Yu's gaze was vigilant as he stared at the middle-aged man walking over. He said in a deep voice, "Wei Rui." The middle-aged man walking over was Wei Rui from the Beast Envoy clan. He stared at He Yu, who was in a sorry state. After all, He Yu was an existence in the advanced Earth Immortal realm. He was definitely one of the top 10 experts in this batch. At this moment, he was actually in such a sorry state. Who was the one who did this? In particular, He Yu's boneless right hand drooped down powerlessly. It was obvious that it had suffered a destructive injury that couldn't be healed. Moreover, He Yu's aura was extremely weak, and his cultivation level had dropped to the middle stage of the Earth Immortal realm. There was no doubt, Wei Rui's is his realm. Wei Rui realm Wei. He Yu's studio his realm is. However, the moment he retreated, the large eagle on Wei Rui's shoulder suddenly became fierce. Then, like a gust of wind, it instantly swept behind He Yu. Its speed was so fast that it was beyond He Yu's expectations. He Yu's face was unsightly. The large eagle on Wei Rui's shoulder was not simple. It was one of the illusory beasts that the Beast Envoy clan's ancestor Wei Wuyin had extracted from the Beast Envoy Saint Talisman. Wei Wuyin had even used some method to insert a trace of the Beast Envoy Saint Talisman's origin into it. Although Wei Rui's cultivation was only at the intermediate Earth Immortal realm, relying on the large eagle formed from the Beast Envoy Saint Talisman, an advanced Earth Immortal realm expert would not dare to face Wei Rui directly. At this moment, being stared at by the large eagle, He-Yu's heart was thumping wildly. He was extremely nervous, but he was cursing Zhuowen in his heart. If it were not for Zhuowen, how could he have fallen to such a state? Brother He, what are you trying to do? You haven't answered my question just now. Wei Rui casually walked into the building and said indifferently. He-Yu's eyes flickered, and he sighed softly. I was injured by Zhuowen. He is very strong, and I am not his opponent. Wei Rui's eyes narrowed. After pondering for a moment, he nodded. That Zhuowen is indeed extraordinary. If it were me, I would not have taken the initiative to provoke such a fiend. Brother, he is truly courageous. He-Yu's face flushed red. He coldly stared at Wei Rui. Brother Wei, the relationship between our clans is pretty good. I've been too heavily injured this time. If you help me cross the path to death, I will definitely repay you in the future. Wei Rui smiled. That's easy. With the relationship between our clans, why can't I help Brother He? Wei Rui walked towards He-Yu. He-Yu's eyes narrowed slightly, and he cupped his fists together. Then I'll have to thank Brother Wei. Boom. However, as soon as He-Yu finished speaking, coldness erupted from Wei Rui's eyes. After that, he swiftly formed a fist with his right hand and smashed it towards He-Yu. At the instant that Wei Rui attacked, the eagle let out a grim howl and leaped into the sky. Countless feathers shot out and formed a feather sword in Wei Rui's hand. Swoosh! The feather sword flashed explosively and stabbed towards He-Yu's heart. At the same time, the eagle flapped its wings, causing a violent gale to whistle and form an extremely thick wall of wind behind He-Yu, and it completely blocked off his path of retreat. Wei Rui, what's the meaning of this? He-Yu howled fiercely, and he formed a seal with his right hand as well. He immediately executed the immortal arts of blade, spear, and sword. 3 enormous illusory images of the blade, spear, and sword flashed explosively towards Wei Rui. The corners of Wei Rui's mouth were covered in a cold smile, and he said, Brother He, aren't we of the same mind? Otherwise, how could you possibly execute an immortal art so swiftly? If I hadn't made the first move, I'm afraid that Brother He would have already made his move. After he finished speaking, Wei Rui remained silent. With a twist of his waist, he suddenly shuttled through the 3 weapon phantoms like a shuttle. After that, he repeatedly slashed out with his feather sword. Instantly, the 3 weapon phantoms collapsed inch by inch and collapsed with a bang. He-Yu's injuries were too severe, and even the King Blade Saint Talisman had been taken away by Zhuowen. He was no match for Wei Rui in his peak state. After breaking through the 3 illusory images, Wei Rui's sneer deepened, and his feather sword shot towards He-Yu's forehead like a shuttle. At this moment, He-Yu's face was ashen, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. His eyes were filled with the desire to die. His injuries were too severe, and he was already an arrow at the end of its flight. How could he be a match for Wei Rui? He knew why Wei Rui had attacked him, so he immediately shouted, Wei Rui, the trace of origin of the King Blade Saint Talisman has been taken away by Zhuowen. It's useless to kill me. Wei Rui was stunned, and his killing intent intensified. He did not believe He-Yu's words at all. You forced me to do this. He-Yu roared furiously, and a terrifying aura burst out from his body like a raging storm. Then, a boundless white light filled his entire body. This madman wants to self-destruct his primordial spirit. Wei Rui stopped abruptly and whistled. The giant eagle above swooped down and carried Wei Rui on its back. Then, it flew up and flew into the distance. However, the large eagle did not fly for long before He-Yu's primordial spirit exploded. Then, a terrifying shockwave surged out. Although the surrounding deathly aura was terrifying, the deathly aura seemed to have been annihilated by the terrifying explosion. Fear appeared in Wei Rui's eyes. The range of a primordial spirit explosion was too large. He knew that it was impossible for him to completely dodge it. Thus, he let out a shrill cry. The large eagle closed its wings and enveloped Wei Rui within. The moment the large eagle wrapped Wei Rui up, the power of the explosion spread out and drowned the large eagle in an instant. The explosion was so loud that the entire path of death shook. The warriors in other parts of the path of death felt something and raised their heads to look. At the end of the dead end, an elegant figure was walking slowly. In the darkness around him, there were irregular black shadows constantly sweeping out. However, the moment the black shadows came, the graceful figure seemed to have an invisible force. The black shadows exploded into clouds of black mist in an area of dozens of feet around him. They were unable to escape. Someone's primordial spirit self-destructed? Looking at this fluctuation, it should be the primordial spirit of a late earthly immortal realm expert. The figure suddenly stopped and looked into the distance with a contemplative look in his eyes. However, he quickly lost interest and continued to walk forward. Looks like I should be the first to arrive at the path of death. The only ones who are worthy of my attention are Chen Yang and Zhuowen. At the mention of Zhuowen, the figure's eyes were blazing. He had experienced the invisible ripple that spread out from Zhuowen's primordial boulder the most. Others might not know, but he knew that Zhuowen might have truly comprehended Dao intent. Thinking about the illusory Dao intent, Yuan Hongwen felt so excited that he trembled. He was only a sliver away from Dao intent. He knew that if he could fight with Zhuowen and comprehend the true Dao intent, he might be able to completely comprehend Dao intent. Zhuowen, I'm looking forward to meeting you outside the path of death. At that time, our battle will be unavoidable, Yuan Hongwen muttered in a low voice. Shortly after, he took a step forward. His entire body was filled with fighting intent that soared into the sky. Instantly, the black shadows that were hidden in the surrounding darkness all exploded. Yuan Hongwen took a step forward and walked out of the path of death. He entered the path of life that was brimming with vitality. On the path of life, there was only a towering tree. The towering tree spiraled upwards, ultimately leading to the endless void. There was a white vortex in the sky. Yuan Hongwen stood under the towering tree. He was not in a hurry to go up. Instead, he sat down with his legs crossed. He was waiting for a person that he had to fight. On the other side of the path of death, Zhuowen swept past the black pond. Soon after, he felt the terrifying ripples of a Yuan spirit's self-destruction. He felt a familiar feeling from the ripples. Zhuowen's eyes narrowed. After a moment of silence, he did not rush towards the direction of the explosion. Instead, he rushed towards the exit of the path of death. No matter what happened to He, it had nothing to do with him. After all, he had already obtained the important things on He. Even if he went over, it would not be of much benefit to him. Instead, it would be a waste of time. Chapter 1796. Pan Fei. There were a total of 6 figures walking in front of him. Zhuowen was no stranger to these 6 figures, as they were all ranked among the top experts in this war of the gods. These 6 people were Ji Chenyang, Kong Haogan, Pan Fei, Shi Bin, Sichu Nianyue, and Dong Qixin. Among them, Pan Fei and Shi Bin were experts at the peak of the Earth Immortal stage, so they were far ahead of the others. Ji Chenyang and Kong Haogan followed closely behind, followed by Sichu Nianyue and Dong Qixin. The 6 of them were not ordinary people. Although the surrounding black shadows were numerous and strange, they did not pose much of an obstacle to the 6 of them. They continued to advance in an orderly manner. Zhuowen quietly stopped at the edge of the road of death. His gaze passed through the endless black shadows and finally landed on the road of life, on the arrogant figure who had been sitting cross-legged under the towering tree from beginning to end. Perhaps sensing Zhuowen's gaze, the figure sitting cross-legged slowly opened his eyes. His gaze burst forth with boundless light, and finally landed on Zhuowen's body. Their gazes passed through the countless black shadows and finally collided. A monstrous battle intent suddenly surged. This battle intent was extremely powerful. Between the 2 of them, it actually set off a violent invisible gale. The 6 people, who were originally advancing in an orderly manner within the black shadows, also felt this powerful fighting spirit and stopped in their tracks one after another. What a powerful battle intent! Pan Fei and Shabin, who were at the front, looked at each other in dismay. They quickly noticed that Yuan Hongwen, who was sitting cross-legged under the towering tree on the road of life, had already opened his eyes and was staring at them with a blazing gaze. Soon after, the two of them followed Yuan Hongwen's gaze and finally saw the tall and straight figure standing quietly in the distance. They couldn't help but ask in surprise, "It's him?" Not only Pan Fei and Shabin, but Ji Chenyang, Kong Haogan, Sichu Nianyue, and Dong Qixin also turned their heads. When they saw the tall and straight figure standing at the edge of the road of death, they all had different expressions on their faces. "Zhuowen," Ji Chenyang murmured with a complicated look in her eyes. Pan Fei and Shabin's gazes were calm. Even though Zhuowen's performance in the heaven, earth, and arcane tests had exceeded their expectations, his cultivation was only at the intermediate stage of the earthly immortal realm after all, and it was 2 stages lower than them. So they didn't really take Zhuowen seriously. Compared to Zhuowen, both of them ought to be afraid of Yuan Hongwen. Yuan Hongwen's cultivation had actually attained the peak of the earthly immortal realm at an unknown time. Even though his cultivation was similar to theirs, his combat strength was truly too terrifying. Back then, when Yuan Hongwen was a half-immortal, he was able to defeat an Earth Immortal. Now that he was a peak Earth Immortal, his strength was definitely far beyond an ordinary peak Earth Immortal. Even an early Heaven Immortal might not be able to defeat Yuan Hongwen easily. As for Kong Haogan and Dong Qixin, their gazes were filled with dread as they looked at Zhuowen. Without a doubt, after Zhuowen's previous performance, the two of them dared not underestimate Zhuowen. As for Sichu Nianyue, her eyes revealed a confused look from time to time. However, when her beautiful eyes fell on Zhuowen, there was always a trace of struggle in them. This trace of struggle was extremely obscure, but Zhuowen caught it. Zhuowen took a deep look at Sichu Nianyue. When he first saw Sichu Nianyue, he felt that Sichu Nianyue was extremely strange. Now that he looked at her again, he felt even stranger. "I have to pay more attention to Sichu Nianyue," Zhuowen muttered in his heart. "Zhuowen, in this war of gods, only you and I are qualified to fight." Yuan Hongwen slowly stood up. His eyes were calm, but the fighting intent in his body was getting stronger and stronger. Like a gale, his clothes and hair were fluttering wantonly. His words were extremely arrogant. It could be said that he didn't put the others in his eyes at all. This caused the eyes of Pan Fei and the other 5 to turn gloomy. Especially Pan Fei and Shabin. They frowned and said in a deep voice, "Yuan Hongwen, are the two of us inferior to Zhuowen, who is only at the middle stage of the earthly immortal realm?" Yuan Hongwen's eyes shone. He glanced at the unconvinced Pan Fei and Shabin and said, "You two don't understand. In my eyes, you are indeed inferior to Zhuowen." Without a doubt, Yuan Hongwen's words were extremely hateful. Pan Fei and Shabin's eyes became unfriendly. However, they weren't looking at Yuan Hongwen, but Zhuowen, who was behind him. Even Ji Chenyang, Kong Haoqian, and Dong Qixin were unconvinced. They were the top experts in their respective forces and thought highly of themselves. Even if they were afraid of Zhuowen, they didn't think they were any weaker than Zhuowen. Now, Yuan Hongwen's words had completely rejected them. If it was someone else, they might have taken it as a joke. However, the person who said it was no ordinary person. He was the god's son of God, Yuan Hongwen of the Primal Chaos Temple. He was an existence that even the experts of the older generation were afraid of. Yuan Hongwen's words naturally carried a lot of weight. "Haha, since you think that we are inferior to Zhuowen, then I will prove to you that your words are wrong." Pan Fei let out a long laugh. He waved his sleeves and stopped moving forward. Then, he stomped his right foot and retreated backward like a bolt of black lightning. Pan Fei's target was Zhuowen, who was standing at the edge of a dead end. Zhuowen's gaze was calm as he gazed at Pan Fei, who flashed over explosively, and his gaze was piercingly cold. He was completely able to discern that Yuan Hongwen's words were intentional, and it was probably to make one of these 6 people make a move. His goal was naturally to test Zhuowen's strength. Yuan Hongwen stood calmly and looked at Zhuowen from afar. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly. Although it was a little despicable for him to use such a method to test his strength, he had to do it. Because, in his opinion, if his opponent could not even defeat Pan Fei, then he was not qualified to fight with him at all. Pan Fei should be able to force you to use your Dao intent, right? Yuan Hongwen muttered softly, his eyes burning with passion. Pan Fei was extremely fast. The aura of a peak Earth Immortal was released without any scruples. Everywhere he passed, the surrounding black figures exploded into clouds of black fog. The power was as if the sky was pressing down on them. It was extremely terrifying. Ji Chenyang and the other three, who were advancing at the back, changed their expressions slightly and avoided Pan Fei. Looks like Zhuowen is going to be unlucky. Kong Haoqian's lips curled up slightly and he sneered in his heart. Other than Ji Chenyang, the others showed a mocking expression. How could they not know that Yuan Hongwen's words were meant to provoke Pan Fei? Even though Pan Fei was aware of Yuan Hongwen's motive, he still went along with it. The reason for this was because he didn't put Zhuo Wentai in his eyes. Zhuowen's talent in comprehension was indeed top-notch. This was enough to prove that he passed the three gates of heaven, earth, and profound. However, his cultivation was not high after all. How strong could his combat strength be? If Zhuowen's cultivation was also at the late or peak Earth Immortal realm, Pan Fei would not be so impulsive. However, Zhuowen's cultivation was only at the intermediate Earth Immortal realm. The gap between them was too big. Therefore, Pan Fei was willing to fly over so quickly. Pan Fei's speed was very fast. He was getting closer and closer to Zhuowen. However, Zhuowen stood quietly and his eyes were filled with calmness. When Pan Fei was only 100 meters away from Zhuowen, the malevolence in his eyes intensified. He looked down at Zhuowen and said indifferently, "Zhuowen, although there is no enmity between us, in order to prove that Yuan Hongwen's words are wrong, you can only die." Zhuowen raised his head. Pan Fei's speed was too fast, and a gust of wind blew Zhuowen's messy shoulder-length hair. Zhuowen stared at Pan Fei and said, "Just because of a sentence from Yuan Hongwen, you want to take my life? If you want to prove it, why don't you attack Yuan Hongwen?" Pan Fei smirked and said, "This is the most convenient way. Yuan Hongwen's cultivation is also at the peak Earth Immortal realm. I admit that I am not his opponent. Although your talent is strong, your cultivation is too weak. Killing you is easy." Pan Fei laughed loudly. His eyes were filled with coldness and malevolence. Then, he grabbed at the void with his right hand. Suddenly, the space behind Pan Fei collapsed and a pair of enormous beast claws reached out. Immortal technique beast claws. The beast claws were too fast. They reached out from the space crack and mercilessly grabbed at Zhuowen. They wanted to crush him completely. Zhuowen's eyes were cold. He flicked his finger and took out a ball of white light from his spirit ring. The ball of light had an obscure aura and was covered with layers of terrifying restrictions. The moment Zhuowen took out the ball of light, the pair of beast claws suddenly grabbed and completely submerged Zhuowen's figure. Pan Fei laughed and said, "Weak. How can a middle-stage Earth Immortal realm be a match for a peak Earth Immortal realm?" Ji Chunyan's beautiful eyes narrowed. She stared at the terrifying beast claws and was shocked. As for the others, they all had different expressions. No one knew what they were thinking. Bang! 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 Suddenly, a series of explosions came from the beast claws. The surface of the beast claws was suddenly covered with countless cracks. Then, with a boom, it completely collapsed. A figure stepped out slowly. Although it looked like he was walking slowly, if one looked closely, they would find that the figure was extremely fast. Every step was very regular and different. Pan Fei's eyes narrowed and he snorted. He clenched his right hand again and a surge of celestial core power gushed out from his sleeve. Then, he made a hand seal and a pair of beast claws reached out from the void again. However, this time, the beast claws were thousands of feet long. They looked too terrifying. Zhuowen held the ball of light in his left hand and flicked his right hand again to take out He-Yu's immortal slaughtering sword. At the same time, the Fushi cauldron flew out from between his eyebrows and he put the immortal slaughtering sword into the mouth of the cauldron without hesitation. Within the mouth of the cauldron, waves of terrifying pressure gathered on the surface of the immortal slaughtering sword as time passed, causing the sword's power to become more and more terrifying. The beast claws were too fast. In 3 breaths' time, they were above Zhuowen's head. Zhuowen narrowed his eyes and suddenly pulled out the immortal slaughtering sword. Suddenly, a vast and boundless pressure burst out from the sword's blade and tip, forming an upside-down storm. That's He used immortal slaughtering sword. Chapter 1797. Explode. Everyone quickly recalled the sudden explosion in the path of death. They were no strangers to that vibration. It was the powerful force of a primordial spirit's self-destruction. Now that they saw He use immortal slaughtering sword in Zhuowen's hand, they quickly linked it to He use primordial spirit self-destruction. The culprit behind He Yu's death was most likely Zhuowen. He Yu's cultivation was at the late earthly immortal realm. Due to the trace of the King Blade sacred talisman's origin in his body, even a peak earthly immortal would not be able to defeat him easily. However, Zhuowen was able to force He Yu to self-destruct his primordial spirit. This showed how terrifying Zhuowen's combat strength was. Yuan Hongwen's eyes became brighter. He stared at the immortal slaughtering sword in Zhuowen's hand, but his attention was quickly attracted by the Fushi cauldron floating above the immortal slaughtering sword. He sensed a strand of terrifying pressure from the Fushi cauldron that even shocked him. He was very familiar with this pressure, and it was similar to the pressure created by the countless ancient phantoms at the center of the celestial pool all those years ago. This kid really has a lot of secrets on him. The collapse of the celestial pond and the disappearance of the pressure must have something to do with this strange broken cauldron floating above his head, right? Yuan Hongwen's eyes revealed a look of understanding. The immortal slaughtering sword slashed out, and a huge crescent-shaped sword light soared into the sky. On the surface of the sword light, there was an extremely horrifying pressure. The might of this pressure was even more terrifying than the sword ray itself. The moment the sword slashed out, Zhuowen immediately inserted the immortal slaughtering sword into the Fushi cauldron. The pressure in the Fushi cauldron was very terrifying. It could give a saint weapon a powerful pressure. The longer it existed in the cauldron, the more terrifying the pressure would be. The sword light was extremely fast. It instantly blasted on the beast claw that was thousands of feet long. Then, countless marks appeared on the surface of the beast claw. It was a pity that the beast claw was simply too huge. These marks were nothing to the massive beast claw. The beast claw only stopped for a few breaths of time before it continued to rumble and crush down. Zhuowen's eyes narrowed slightly. He took a step forward with his right foot and disappeared. When he reappeared, he was already behind Pan Fei. Pan Fei snorted coldly. Without thinking, he immediately released his celestial core power and surrounded his body. Then, without hesitation, he teleported to the beast's claw. Countless claw shadows covered Pan Fei's body, forming an extremely terrifying defense. Your speed is indeed very fast. Unfortunately, your speed is completely useless against me, who is already on guard. Pan Fei sneered and stomped his right foot, causing the beast claw to change direction in midair and rush towards Zhuowen at an even faster speed than before. After seeing the immortal slaughtering sword, Pan Fei no longer looked down on Yi Shiwen. The fact that Yi Shiwen could defeat He Yu and even snatch his natal celestial artifact, the immortal slaughtering sword, showed that Yi Shiwen's strength was not to be underestimated. The corner of Zhuowen's mouth was full of a sneer. He stomped his right foot again and slowly disappeared into the void, dodging the beast claw's attack. Next, Zhuowen did not face the beast claw head-on. Instead, he relied on his powerful speed to dodge again and again. This made Pan Fei extremely impatient. Finally, after 20 breaths of time, Pan Fei said impatiently, "Zhuowen, are you going to be a coward forever?" Zhuowen smiled and said indifferently, 20 breaths of time is the limit that the immortal slaughtering sword can withstand. Pan Fei frowned slightly. He was puzzled by Zhuowen's words. But soon, his gaze fell on the Fushi cauldron floating above Zhuowen. 20 breaths of time was exactly the time that Yi Shiwen placed the immortal slaughtering sword in the Fushi cauldron. "Do you think you can defeat me with just the immortal slaughtering sword?" Pan Fei shook his head and laughed. But soon, his expression changed because Zhuowen slowly pulled out the immortal slaughtering sword from the Fushi cauldron. Clang! The moment the immortal slaughtering sword was pulled out, a terrifying aura as vast as the ocean immediately spread out from the surface of the immortal slaughtering sword. This aura was too terrifying. It spread out and shrouded the entire edge of the path of death. Bang! 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 The numerous black figures hidden in the darkness at the edge of the dead end screeched miserably one after another under the effect of this pressure. They exploded into clusters of black fog. Ji Chenyang, Kong Haogan, Shi Bin, Sichu Nianyue, and Dong Qixin's expressions changed drastically. Even they felt a little overwhelmed by this aura. They quickly used their own methods to resist this terrifying aura. What's going on? When did the aura on the surface of the immortal slaughtering sword reach such a terrifying level? Ji Chunyan's beautiful eyes frowned slightly as she asked in bewilderment. The rest of the people were also bewildered. Only Yuan Hongwen's eyes grew brighter and brighter. Slash. Zhuowen slashed out again. At this moment, the sword light from the immortal slaughtering sword was thousands of feet long and terrifying. It was not any weaker than the beast claws. Especially the aura on the surface of the sword light, it was extremely terrifying. Just the pressure emitted by this sword light alone caused the surrounding space to distort. It looked extremely awkward and strange. Feeling the terrifying aura emitted from the sword light, Pan Fei's expression changed. He did not expect the immortal slaughtering sword to be able to launch such a terrifying attack. Bang! 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 The sword light was like lightning and instantly blasted on the beast claws. Immediately, terrifying cracks appeared on the surface of the beast claws before they collapsed. Although the sword light had become extremely dim, it did not disappear. Instead, it continued to rush out and slammed heavily in front of Pan Fei. Pan Fei's expression turned ugly. He did not expect Zhuowen to be so difficult to deal with. He snorted coldly and took out 7 small colorful flags from his spiritual ring. Forming a seal with both hands, he said in a deep voice, "Big Dipper flags, form the Big Dipper formation." As he spoke, Pan Fei threw out the 7 small colorful flags. Then, his celestial core power wrapped around the 7 small flags. Suddenly, the colorful flags arranged themselves in the path of the Big Dipper, like a dragon circling around Pan Fei. The sword light was already extremely dim. Now that it had hit the Big Dipper flags, it could not hold on for long before it collapsed inch by inch. After destroying the sword light, Pan Fei sneered. Then, he looked at Zhuowen and revealed a shocked expression. He saw that Zhuowen had unknowingly arrived in front of the Big Dipper flags. His right hand was holding the white ball of light that he had taken out earlier. "Are you looking for death?" Pan Fei revealed a cold smile as he changed the seal with both hands. The Big Dipper flags that were arranged around him abruptly flashed out, following the strange path and flashed towards Zhuowen. Zhuowen's gaze was calm to the extreme. He took 7 steps in succession in the air as profound Tao insight suffused out. His figure was like a ghost that flashed and flashed in the air, and it was actually difficult for others to catch sight of Zhuowen's figure. Zhuowen had only used the strength of a half-step Tao insight this time, so there was really no need for him to use the full strength of his Tao insight to deal with Pan Fei. Moreover, every step Zhuowen took was in the empty space of the Big Dipper flags. After taking 7 steps, Zhuowen miraculously avoided the encirclement of the Big Dipper flags. What swift speed! What profound strength! Ji Chunyan's beautiful eyes flickered as she stared fixedly at Zhuowen's phantom-like speed. From Zhuowen's body, she could feel traces of the strange and unfathomable strength that she had felt in the ancient boulder earlier. Kong Haogan, Shi Bin, and the others also revealed shocked expressions. Obviously, they were also shocked by Zhuowen's speed. That speed was even more terrifying than the speed that Zhuowen had displayed in the celestial pool earlier. Pan Fei's face was gloomy. Just as he was about to activate the Big Dipper flags again, he saw Zhuowen reveal a strange smile on the corner of his mouth. Subsequently, Zhuowen's right hand tossed out the ball of light in his hand. The ball of light was extremely fast, like a meteor that streaked across the sky and instantly flashed towards Pan Fei. Moreover, as it flashed over, the restriction on the surface of the ball of light began to slowly peel off. An indescribably terrifying aura leaked out from the ball of light. This is a primordial spirit. The moment he felt the aura, Pan Fei's face stiffened. He immediately recognized the origin of the aura. The surface of the primordial spirit was previously sealed by Zhuowen's devouring curse restriction. The aura and shape of the primordial spirit were all sealed, so Pan Fei did not pay too much attention to it. Now, the restriction on the surface of the ball of light had completely disappeared, and the aura of the primordial spirit was completely exposed. Moreover, the aura of the primordial spirit was extremely heterogeneous, as if it was filled with the aura of many primordial spirits. Moreover, the aura of the primordial spirit was much stronger than that of an ordinary earthly immortal. Even Pan Fei felt a chill down his spine. Pan Fei knew very well that if he really caused the primordial spirit to self-destruct, he would be seriously injured, if not killed. Run! Without hesitation, Pan Fei waved his sleeve and retrieved the Big Dipper flags. Then, he attempted to teleport away from this place. Unfortunately, the moment Pan Fei teleported away, a terrifying invisible ripple spread out in all directions, immediately affecting the surrounding space. Pan Fei, who was about to teleport away, immediately stopped in his tracks. His face was pale and bloodless as he stared at Zhuowen, who was thousands of meters away from him. He shouted angrily, "Zhuowen, you little bastard!" As soon as he finished speaking, the primordial spirit emitted countless rays of white light. Then, it exploded completely. In an instant, a scorching wave of fire spread out for tens of thousands of miles, immediately enveloping Pan Fei's entire body. In the end, Pan Fei only had time to shield himself with the Big Dipper flags. He covered his entire body with celestial core power and used the strongest defense he had in his life. After that, he was completely engulfed by the terrifying wave of fire. Retreat! The moment the primordial spirit self-destructed, Ji Chenyang, Kong Haogan, and the other four people's faces changed drastically. They exerted all their strength and rushed toward the path of survival. Their speed was many times faster than before. Before the wave of fire spread out, they all entered the path of survival. Chapter 1798. Scroll of sealed dimension. Zhuowen's eyes were like torches as he stared at the terrifying explosion before him. Then, he suddenly stabbed the immortal slaughtering sword into the Fushi cauldron and counted silently in his heart. 20 breath. Zhuowen muttered in a low voice. Then, he suddenly pulled out the immortal slaughtering sword and slashed out with his right hand. A terrifying crescent-shaped sword ray that was several thousand feet long shot out again and charged into the explosion. After that, Zhuowen stabbed the immortal slaughtering sword into the Fushi cauldron again. After 20 breaths, he slashed out another sword ray. The explosion lasted for around 200 breaths. During this time, Zhuowen had slashed out a total of 10 sword rays that charged into the explosion. When the last sword ray charged into the explosion, a shattering sound resounded. Then, Pan Fei's miserable shriek resounded from within the explosion. Zhuowen's eyes shone like torches. Pan Fei's Big Dipper flag was not simple. Zhuowen had seen through the surging waves of fire the instant Pan Fei's Yuan spirit self-detonated. He had seen that Pan Fei had used the Big Dipper flag to barely block the terrifying explosion. This was also why Zhuowen did not hesitate to reinforce the immortal slaughtering sword with the Fushi cauldron and slashed out the moment the explosion arose. His objective was to completely break the balance that Pan Fei had barely managed to hold on in the explosion. On the other hand, the 10 terrifying sword rays that had been reinforced by the Fushi cauldron had completely broken Pan Fei's balance. Moreover, Pan Fei's sacred artifact, the Big Dipper flag, had been completely destroyed by the dual attacks of the self-destruction of his soul and the sword rays. The Big Dipper flag was destroyed. Although Pan Fei was protected by his celestial core power, it was useless in the face of the terrifying explosive energy even if he used all his celestial core power to defend himself. Miserable shrieks rang out incessantly. Pan Fei's curses towards Zhuowen were mixed in as well. Pan Fei was constantly twitching and rolling in the waves of fire as if he was enduring extreme pain. Perhaps because he was unable to endure the pain, Pan Fei actually burned his own primordial spirit and forcibly teleported within the range of the explosion. Spurt. When Pan Fei appeared at the end of the path of death, his entire body was charred black. Clouds of blood mist were constantly spurting out from his acupuncture points, and his aura was extremely weak. However, just as Pan Fei was out of the fire's range and was about to catch his breath, he heard the sound of something tearing through the air. Unbeknownst to him, Zhuowen had appeared behind him with a punch, not giving Pan Fei the slightest chance to escape. Pan Fei let out a low roar and mobilized the remaining celestial core power in his body. He condensed it in his palm and sent it out to meet Zhuowen's fist. Crack. Unfortunately, Pan Fei's resistance was negligible to Zhuowen, who had a perfect saint body. The moment his right palm came into contact with Zhuowen, it was smashed into smithereens by Zhuowen's punch. Then, Pan Fei burst into a bloody mist. Poochie. Pan Fei spat out a mouthful of blood and flew backwards. His lips trembled and his face was pale. Die. Zhuowen did not give Pan Fei the slightest chance to escape. He stomped his right foot and instantly appeared above Pan Fei. Then, he pointed his right finger at Pan Fei's glabella. Countless underworld water droplets condensed on Zhuowen's fingertip. No. Zhuowen, don't kill me. Spare me. Pan Fei's eyes were wide open as he stared at the indifferent young man above him. He did not care about his dignity at all and immediately begged for mercy. However, a trace of regret rose in his heart. If he had known that Zhuowen was so abnormal, he would not have taken the initiative to provoke this fiend. It's too late, Zhuowen said faintly. Then, his right fingertip landed on Pan Fei's glabella. Then, the underworld water droplets poured into Pan Fei's sea of consciousness and spread throughout his body, madly absorbing Pan Fei's spiritual essence. In an instant, Pan Fei's entire body was sucked dry. Then, Zhuowen's right hand turned into a claw and grabbed Pan Fei's lower abdomen, directly pulling out the primordial spirit from his dantian. Ignoring Pan Fei's begging, Sumo directly wiped out Pan Fei's consciousness and used the devouring curse to seal the primordial spirit completely. Then, he threw it into the spiritual ring. Zhuowen's series of actions were extremely fast, so fast that before Ji Chenyang and the others could react, Pan Fei had already died a violent death, and even his primordial spirit had been seized by Zhuowen. Hiss. When they came to their senses, they all inwardly sucked in a breath of cold air, especially Shabin, who felt extremely uneasy in his heart. Previously, when Yuan Hongwen spoke highly of Zhuowen, he had the same thought as Pan Fei. If Pan Fei had not made the first move, Shabin might have made a move to prove himself. But now, Pan Fei's miserable end made Shabin feel extremely lucky. In his heart, he was not only wary of Zhuowen, but also terrified. They were both at the peak of the earthly immortal realm, and Pan Fei's strength was not weaker than his. If he was the one facing Zhuowen, he would probably end up the same as Pan Fei. Even the god's child from the heavens likes to use such tricks. Zhuowen glanced at Yuan Hongwen indifferently and sneered. Yuan Hongwen smiled slightly. He looked deeply at Zhuowen and said, "It's just a test to see if Brother Zhuo is qualified to fight with me." Then, am I qualified now? Zhuowen asked indifferently. Yuan Hongwen pondered for a moment and said with a smile, "Of course I am, then let's fight." Zhuowen's eyes emitted a cold light as he said in a deep voice. Yuan Hongwen slowly stood up. A surge of battle intent was getting stronger and stronger. He stared at Zhuowen and laughed, "Why can't we fight? However, before that, I hope that all of you won't seize the opportunity to escape while I'm in battle with Brother Zhuo. The first one can only be selected between me and Zhuowen, and all of you don't have the qualifications." Speaking of this, Yuan Hongwen looked indifferently at Ji Chenyang, Kong Haogan, and the other four. His words naturally made the five of them unhappy. However, Yuan Hongwen didn't give them a chance to complain. He took out a scroll from his spirit ring and opened it abruptly. His right hand took out a writing brush from somewhere and started to write on the scroll in a flamboyant manner. "I am the king of this world. Seal." After he finished writing, Yuan Hongwen suddenly grabbed the scroll and threw it towards the towering tree. The scroll instantly expanded and covered the exit above the towering tree. Moreover, This scroll was not simple. It contained an extremely terrifying seal power. However, Zhuowen's eyes narrowed and revealed a dignified expression. This was because he could feel the powerful ancient seal power within the scroll. Moreover, the ancient seal power within the scroll was very strong and mysterious. Even though Zhuowen had mastered the devouring curse seal, he could not see through the details of the ancient seal power within the scroll. This scroll should have been created by an arcana master who was proficient in ancient seal power. Sealed boundary scroll? Ji Chunyan's beautiful eyes narrowed and her face darkened. Kong Haogan and the others also reacted and their faces changed. Obviously, they had heard of the sealed boundary scroll and their faces did not look good. This sealed boundary scroll had the power to seal a world. Its sealing power was very strong. It was basically impossible for anyone below the Heaven Immortal realm to break the seal of the sealed boundary scroll. It could be said that none of the warriors who entered the path of life and death this time had the ability to break the sealed boundary scroll. Yuan Hongwen leaped onto the high branches of the towering tree. He looked down at Zhuowen and said indifferently, "Brother Zhuo, can you fight with me? I know that you must have comprehended the Tao intent from the ancient boulder. Let me see the true power of the Tao intent." Tao intent. Ji Chenyang, Kong Haogan, Shi Bin, Sichu Nianyue, and Dong Qixin were all moved by Yuan Hongwen's words. To them, Tao intent was like thunder to them. Legend had it that in the ancient times, those who could be called celestial sages had generally touched upon the aspect of Tao intent. But now, geniuses who could touch upon Tao intent were extremely rare. The only one they knew was Yuan Hongwen. There was no one who had comprehended Tao intent. But now, Yuan Hongwen said that Zhuowen had completely comprehended Tao intent. How could they not be shocked? Zhuowen looked deeply at Yuan Hongwen and said, "If you want to understand the power of Tao intent, then let's see if you have the ability to force me to use Tao intent." As he spoke, Zhuowen took a step forward. Invisible ripples spread under his feet and his figure disappeared. Then, he silently landed on the branch opposite Yuan Hongwen. The two of them looked at each other from a distance. Their eyes were bursting with monstrous battle intent. Swoosh, swoosh. At the same time, figures rushed out from the path of life and death. The person in the lead had a large eagle perched on his shoulder. But this person's clothes were ragged and his face was pale and bloodless. This person was Wei Rui of the Beast Envoy clan. Back then, he had forced Hiyu's soul to explode. Although he had done his best, he still suffered heavy injuries. Moreover, if one looked carefully, the large eagle on his shoulder was covered in blood and many of its feathers had fallen off. It looked even more dispirited than Wei Rui himself. Looking at the dispirited large eagle on his shoulder, Wei Rui sighed in his heart. When Hiyu's soul had exploded, he had relied on the large eagle formed from the Beast Envoy Saint Talisman's origin to protect him. But it had also caused the large eagle to suffer irreparable injuries. It would probably take a lot of time and resources for the large eagle to recover. Thinking about how he had fallen into such a state, Wei Rui hated Hiyu so much that his teeth itched. At the same time, he also hated Zhuowen. If it wasn't for Zhuowen who had caused Hiyu to be in such a state, he wouldn't have been greedy to deal with Hiyu and he wouldn't have been in such a sorry state. Moreover, after Hiyu had exploded, Wei Rui searched for Hiyu's spiritual ring and found that there was no trace of the origin of the King Blade Saint Talisman or the earthly immortal Saint Weapon, Saint Slaughtering Sword. He knew that what Hiyu had said before was true. The origin of the Saint Slaughtering Sword and the King Blade Saint Talisman had been taken by Zhuowen. That was why he hated Zhuowen so much. Wei Rui arrived at the edge of the path of life and found that the edge of the path of life was in a state of decline. He couldn't help but be surprised. But soon, his gaze fell on the two figures facing each other on a towering tree. "It's Yuan Hongwen and Zhuowen." Chapter 1799. Immortal Art's Blackmouth. Could it be that Zhuowen intends to fight Yuan Hongwen? As he gazed at Zhuowen and Yuan Hongwen who stood facing each other from afar, Wei Rui's eyes slowly narrowed while the strange expression within them grew denser. In Wei Rui's heart, Yuan Hongwen's strength was extremely unfathomable. After all, Yuan Hongwen had once defeated an earthly immortal realm expert when he was at the half-immortal realm, and this was something that Wei Rui was unable to accomplish. Now, the aura on Yuan Hongwen's body was even more terrifying, and Yuan Hongwen had already attained the peak of the earthly immortal realm. Moreover, Yuan Hongwen's speed of cultivation was so swift that Wei Rui was utterly unable to compare to him. In Wei Rui's heart, Yuan Hongwen was a true genius, a monstrous genius. No matter how confident he was, he'd never thought of challenging Yuan Hongwen because he knew that it was utterly impossible for him to win. On the other hand, even though Zhuowen's display in the 3 trials was extremely outstanding, Wei Rui knew that there was still a certain gap between Zhuowen and Yuan Hongwen, and he felt that Zhuowen was simply like a mantis trying to stop a chariot. It wasn't just Wei Rui, all the figures that flashed over from behind him had stopped at the edge of a dead end as well, and they stared with surprise at Zhuowen and Yuan Hongwen who stood facing each other from afar. Just like Wei Rui, they revealed strange expressions as well. Without a doubt, they really didn't look favorably upon Zhuowen, and they felt that the two of them who stood facing each other from afar couldn't be compared at all. If you want to understand Dao insights, then force me to utilize the might of Dao insight. Zhuowen stood silently while the battle intent in his eyes grew denser and denser. After that, he suddenly stomped his right foot on the ground. Instantly, the countless branches and leaves on the towering trees in his surroundings fell off successively and withered under his imposing aura. Under Zhuowen's surging imposing aura, the drifting leaves actually swept out to form an extremely surging green dragon that whistled through the air and flashed directly towards Yuan Hongwen. Yuan Hongwen roared with laughter instead and said, "I am naturally able to force you to utilize the might of Dao insights. Just watch." As he spoke, Yuan Hongwen stomped his right foot as well, causing the branches and leaves in the surroundings to wither successively and similarly formed a green dragon. Bang bang bang. Immediately, the 2 green dragons began to roar wantonly, constantly intertwining. From time to time, extremely ear-piercing dragon roars would erupt. Surging waves of air would fly out in all directions between the 2 huge green dragons, and the surrounding space would emit extremely terrifying hissing and cracking sounds. Thud. Yuan Hongwen took a step forward. His long hair fluttered in the wind, and his aura surged out. In an instant, the air around him was like a flood, exploding and surging like a raging tide. After taking a step forward, Yuan Hongwen took another step forward. His aura was even stronger than before. Then, Yuan Hongwen stepped forward step by step, and his aura rose steadily. When he reached the center of the towering tree, his aura reached its peak, and the towering tree trembled violently because of his terrifying aura. Yuan Hongwen's aura was like a flood, spreading out wantonly, sucking in the surrounding air and cracking the surrounding space. Fight! Yuan Hongwen roared. His aura rose to another height, and the fighting intent in his eyes seemed to have solidified. The surging aura condensed into a huge fight word in front of him. As soon as the word was formed, it was like a mountain as it came crashing down on Zhuowen's head. It instantly covered Zhuowen's entire body. Just the monstrous aura and fighting spirit released by Yuan Hongwen alone was enough to make many of the surrounding warriors tremble in fear. Zhuowen let out a long laugh, and his aura rose steadily. Then, the surface of his body began to emit a dark golden light. The dark golden light soared into the sky. Facing the word battle condensed from Yuan Hongwen's aura and fighting spirit, it directly collided with the word battle and blocked it in the void. Then, Zhuowen leaped up, and his right hand quickly drew in front of him. In an instant, 9 golden runes were drawn. The 9 golden runes circled around his right arm, and he directly rushed in front of the fight word, and threw a punch. Rumble. The fight word was imposing, but under Zhuowen's punch, there was no luck at all, and it was directly smashed into powder. Facing Yuan Hongwen, Zhuowen did not hold back, and he directly used the Perfection Saint body. He knew that when facing a powerful demon like Yuan Hongwen, if he did not use all of his strength, he was afraid that he would only be defeated. Your physical body is really terrifying. I just don't know if your powerful physical body can take this move of mine. Yuan Hongwen raised his eyebrows, and his right foot stepped out again. This time, under the sole of his foot, countless celestial core power revolved and condensed. Then, Zhuowen's eyes narrowed. He found that above the void, there was a huge phantom of a giant foot that was hundreds of feet tall. This phantom was completely condensed by surging celestial core power. The aura above the foot was so terrifying that it seemed as if the entire sky would be crushed by it. Subduing dragon fist. Zhuowen's eyes narrowed, and his right foot stepped out into the void. Then, the dark golden light in his body became more and more intense. With the rebound force of his right foot stepping in the air, he swept out like an arrow from a bow. The moment he got close to the huge phantom of the giant foot, he fiercely punched out. At that moment, the 9 golden runes that surrounded him flew out and gave birth to 9 golden dragons. Bang! 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 The 9 golden dragons were not smaller than the phantom of the giant foot. The 9 dragons swept out together, and the phantom of the giant foot directly stagnated in the void. Then, it collapsed inch by inch and collapsed into nothingness. Yuan Hongwen smiled, and he did not care about the collapsed phantom of the giant foot. Instead, his right foot stepped out into the void again. Rumble. The void collapsed in an area of thousands of feet. Then, within the collapsed area, the phantom of a giant foot that was thousands of feet tall appeared and ruthlessly stepped toward the 9 golden dragons. Awoo! In front of the giant foot, the 9 golden dragons were like soft and boneless snakes. They actually let out sorrowful cries as they were directly stepped under the foot. Zhuowen's eyes turned cold. His 5 fingers on his right hand moved, and invisible ripples spread out. The 9 golden dragons that were originally under his foot actually let out a monstrous dragon roar, and in an instant, they lifted the giant foot up. Bang! 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 The moment the dragon roar sounded, the giant foot directly collapsed inch by inch. The 9 golden dragons leaped up again and continued to fly toward Yuan Hongwen. Yuan Hongwen's eyes became brighter and brighter. He recalled the invisible ripples that were created when Zhuowen's 5 fingers moved, and he muttered in a low voice, "This should be the power of Tao intent, but it's too weak. Just based on this, I'm afraid you'll definitely lose." After he finished speaking, Yuan Hongwen suddenly stretched out his right hand. His 5 fingers moved, and then countless black forces swept out from between his fingers. The moment these black forces appeared, they were hidden in the void, like poisonous snakes spying in the dark, ready to hunt at any time. At this moment, the 9 golden dragons had already swept in front of Yuan Hongwen, but Yuan Hongwen's eyes were calm. He stretched out his right hand and gently grasped forward. The countless black forces that were originally hidden in the void suddenly surged out one after another. BZZZ, BZZZ, BZZZ. A slight sound rose, and the 9 golden dragons' enormous bodies froze in midair. Then, under the slash of the black forces, they actually shattered into a golden rain. The moment the 9 golden dragons were broken, Zhuowen's figure did not stop. His right foot took 2 consecutive steps in the void. With the support of half-step Tao intent, his figure was like a ghost, and he disappeared on the spot. In an instant, he was in front of Yuan Hongwen. Immortal technique, killing finger of the underworld. Zhuowen's right hand bent and pointed at the void. Countless underworld water droplets surged out from his body. Then, these terrifying underworld water droplets converged into a giant underworld finger and smashed toward Yuan Hongwen. Yuan Hongwen shook his head and said, "Your immortal technique is probably not mature yet, right? Its power is just barely passable." As he spoke, Yuan Hongwen waved his sleeve, and an even more dense and terrifying black force burst out from his sleeve. These black forces converged together, and actually formed an extremely strange black vortex. This black vortex was like a terrifying fan, and it suddenly spun. The moment the killing finger of the underworld swept past the black vortex, it was actually directly stirred into countless yellow powder by the terrifying power of the black vortex. Immortal technique, Black Mouth. The moment the killing finger of the underworld was broken, Yuan Hongwen's right hand seal changed, and a huge black mouth suddenly swept out from the black vortex. This huge black mouth was extremely fast. As soon as it formed, it swallowed Zhuowen. Moreover, this huge mouth produced an extremely terrifying suction force, causing Zhuowen's body to tremble and faintly become unstable. Immortal technique, Solitary Peak. Zhuoan did not hesitate to use the Solitary Peak, and the huge Solitary Peak blocked in front of him. Boom! The black mouth landed in front of the Solitary Peak. Then, under Zhuoan's astonished gaze, the black mouth actually squirmed rapidly. The upper and lower jaws were like rubber, and suddenly grew out. It was at least 1,000 feet long, and then it swallowed the Solitary Peak in one gulp. The black mouth is an immortal technique that the Divine Master comprehended from the Tao Tai's bloody mouth that swallowed everything. This black mouth has inherited the characteristics of the Tao Tai. It can contain extremely large amounts of energy and objects. Your immortal technique cannot stop it. Yuan Hongwen strolled leisurely, and his bright eyes looked indifferently at Zhuoan. That may not be true. There is no such thing as infinity and eternity in this world. The suction force of this black mouth is indeed terrifying, but it is mainly because my Solitary Peak is not big enough. Having said that, Zhuoan flicked his finger, and immediately took out Pan Fei's primordial spirit. Then, Zhuoan removed the seal on the surface of Pan Fei's primordial spirit, and unceremoniously absorbed all the celestial core power in Pan Fei's primordial spirit. In an instant, nearly half of the celestial core power in Pan Fei's primordial spirit was absorbed by Zhuoan, and Zhuoan's face became extremely rosy. He pointed at the void again, and the huge amount of celestial core power that he had absorbed flowed into the Solitary Peak in the black mouth through his seal. If 100,000 feet is not enough, then 100,000 feet. If 100,000 feet is not enough, then 1,000,000 feet. I want to see what the limit of this black mouth is. Having said that, the Solitary Peak that was swallowed by the black mouth began to expand as the celestial core power flowed into it. Chapter 1800. 10 Directions Landslide. In the instant that the black mouth collapsed, Yuan Hongwen retreated for the first time. His gaze fell upon the terrifying mountain peak, and his eyes filled with solemnity and caution. This kid is so strong. When Yuan Hongwen's immortal art black mouth was shattered by the immortal art lone peak, a strong gust of wind surged in all directions. Many of the warriors below were moved. They all used their own moves to resist the terrifying shockwave that was spreading towards them. Wei Rui's brows furrowed slightly. The wariness in his eyes grew as he looked at Zhuoan. The power that Zhuoan had displayed was truly too powerful. He was actually able to force Yuan Hongwen to such an extent. As for the other martial warriors, they all withdrew their contempt. Their eyes flickered as they stared at the figure in front of the huge lone peak, and a trace of reverence rose in their hearts. Zhuoan's eyes were cold. He waved his right hand and used the celestial origin energy in his body to command the huge mountain. Rumble. At this moment, the 10 million foot tall mountain that stretched across the horizon also moved. Moreover, its speed was increasing. Like an arrow that had been released from a bow, it suddenly shot towards Yuan Hongwen. As the lone mountain flew over, the surrounding space was stirred up with endless terrifying storms. These storms were extremely terrifying. If an ordinary earthen immortal were to be caught in these storms, their fleshly bodies would probably be torn to shreds. Yuan Hongwen frowned slightly, but he did not show any fear. Instead, his battle intent soared. He took a step forward with his right foot, and his right hand formed a sword and pointed towards the sky. Immediately, a huge crack appeared in the sky above him. Moreover, there wasn't just one crack, but one after another. There were actually a total of 10 huge spatial cracks. In the 10 huge spatial rifts, 10 incomparably huge mountains fell down. Although the 10 mountains were not as big as the lone mountain, they were still hundreds of thousands of feet in size. The 10 mountains added together were not much weaker than the lone mountain. Immortal technique, omnidirectional landslide. Yuan Hongwen faintly spat out these words. He formed a seal with his right hand. Immediately, the 10 incomparably huge mountains surrounded the 10 million feet tall lone peak. Then, the 10 mountains began to surge with an extremely terrifying collapsing force. Next, the 10 mountains began to spurt out terrifyingly hot lava. The magma was so huge that it almost enveloped the entire area, forming a boundless sea of magma. First collapse. The power of the collapse spread out, causing the sea of magma to rise with countless high waves. Moreover, This power of the collapse not only affected the lone peak, but also the entire life and death path faintly shook. Many of the martial warriors who were still on the path of life and death were overwhelmed with shock as they felt this terrifying vibration. Although this vibration was not very intense, the faintly discernible aura caused their hearts to be overwhelmed with shock and fear to appear in their eyes. Second collapse. An indifferent voice was once again emitted from Yuan Hongwen's mouth. Soon after, an even more frightening collapsing force emerged from the sea of magma. Countless magma waves rose from this collapsing force, just like countless intertwining fire pythons. In the face of this frightening collapsing force, the 10,000 feet large lone peak's forward momentum actually came to a halt. Third collapse. Fourth collapse. Eighth collapse. The indifferent voice did not stop because of this. Instead, it continued to spread out indifferently. When the power of the collapse reached the eighth collapse, its power had already reached its limit. At this moment, whether it was the lone peak or the path of life and death, the tremors had already become extremely intense and terrifying. Many of the martial warriors on the path of life and death had no choice but to use their own techniques to resist this terrifying vibration. There were even martial warriors who were not strong. Under the aftermath of this collapse, their entire bodies burst into a bloody mist and they directly fainted. Zhuowen stood at the top of the lone peak. He stared at the countless magma around the lone peak and the 10 huge mountains around the magma. His eyes were filled with seriousness. There should be a total of 10 collapses in this 10-directional mountain collapse. Each collapse was a superposition of the previous collapse. Now, it was already the 8th collapse. Zhuowen had no choice but to pay attention to the power of the collapse. He could feel that the lone peak could no longer hold on. On the surface of the lone peak, countless rolling rocks began to peel off, and the mountain showed signs of collapsing and exploding. 9th collapse. Yuan Hongwen's voice rang out again. The magma surged out, forming 10 gigantic magma dragons that were tens of thousands of feet long. These 10 gigantic magma dragons soared into the sky. Immediately after, they violently bombarded the lone peak from 10 different directions. Under the bombardment of these 10 gigantic magma dragons, more cracks appeared on the mountain's surface. Moreover, the moment these cracks appeared, the surrounding magma gushed in, causing the cracks to expand at a high temperature. 10th collapse. Still not breaking. At this moment, Yuan Hongwen's voice became extremely loud and clear. The entire magma was boiling. In the endless boiling magma, there was a terrifying force of collapse. This force of collapse was too terrifying. Not only did it collapse the mountain, but even the surrounding space was affected by this force of collapse, completely collapsing into countless cracks and fragments. On the path of life and death, many martial warriors revealed a look of fear. "Miss, be careful." Shabin suddenly growled. His celestial core power surged, forming an extremely powerful protective shield in front of Ji Chenyang. It wasn't just Shabin, Dong Qixin, Kong Haoqian, and Sichu Nianyue by his side didn't hold back in the slightest and utilized all their abilities. They even utilized their earthly immortal saint artifacts in order to block the terrifying aftershock of the 10th collapse that effused over. Damn it! Wei Rui's face turned ugly. Without hesitation, he once again summoned the giant eagle on his shoulder with a secret technique, allowing it to spread its wings to protect him. Puff! When the force of the collapse spread out, Wei Rui's face suddenly turned pale. He spat out a mouthful of blood, and the giant eagle looked even more dispirited. Wei Rui had no choice but to retreat again and again until he was extremely far away from the path of death. Only then did he manage to block the force of the collapse. At this moment, Wei Rui had already cursed He Yu and Zhuowen in his heart. If he had not been seriously injured by He Yu's primordial spirit explosion, he would not have been in such a sorry state while resisting the force of the collapse. Not only Wei Rui, but the other warriors around him also chose to retreat. They did not dare to face the force of the collapse that spread out. Of course, when these cultivators saw Wei Rui in such a sorry state, they all revealed looks of surprise and began to discuss amongst themselves. They were all puzzled as to why Wei Rui, who was obviously extremely strong, was in such a sorry state from the aftermath of this collapse. Looking at the surprised eyes around him, Wei Rui's face was quite gloomy, but he did not explain anything. Instead, his hatred for Zhuowen grew even stronger. Crack. The power of the 10th collapse was too terrifying. Finally, the terrifying mountain peak began to collapse. Terrifying magma surged up from the surroundings, instantly submerging Zhuowen's entire body. Immortal skill. Ask Buddha. I ask Buddha. A world in a flower, a Buddha in a leaf, a body in a Zen. The moment the magma drowned Zhuowen, Zhuowen used the immortal skill. Ask Buddha. Endless Buddhist light soared into the sky, illuminating the earth and dyeing the sky of the path of life and death golden. The endless magma that was originally rushing over collapsed and scattered under Zhuowen's terrifying immortal skill. Ask Buddha. Zhuowen, on the other hand, put his palms together and stared at Yuan Hongwen, who was outside the magma. Then, he stretched out his right hand and a huge ancient Buddha shadow blasted out its right palm towards Yuan Hongwen's head according to Zhuowen's action. Yuan Hongwen smiled faintly. He took out a great halberd made of bone from his spirit ring. Upon closer inspection, this great halberd should have been forged from the spine of some powerful creature. There was also a surging and dense pressure coming from it. This large halberd was definitely not an ordinary earthly immortal saint artifact. Yuan Hongwen swung his right hand, and the halberd spun violently. Then, he kicked the halberd's tail with his right foot. The halberd let out a hiss, and like a swimming dragon, it flew towards Zhuowen. Bang! 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 The large halberd hit the ancient Buddha's right palm and stopped for a moment. Then, the ancient Buddha's right palm collapsed. The large halberd's aura was like a rainbow as it directly pierced through the ancient Buddha's right palm and rushed towards Zhuowen, who was inside the ancient Buddha shadow. Yuan Hongwen put his hands behind his back and stepped forward, following closely behind the large halberd. The battle intent in his eyes was getting stronger and stronger. He didn't expect that Zhuowen's strength was actually so strong. This kid was definitely the strongest opponent he'd ever encountered in the younger generation. This man still has the power of Tao intent. I don't believe that you won't use the power of Tao intent under my God Slayer halberd. Yuan Hongwen's eyes were blazing. He knew very well that the power of his God Slayer halberd was far more terrifying than an ordinary earthly immortal saint artifact. It was a weapon that was very close to a celestial immortal saint artifact. Swoosh! The God Slayer halberd was extremely fast and arrived in front of Zhuowen in an instant. The strong sound of the halberd piercing through the air entered Zhuowen's ears and actually caused him to feel a piercing pain. Zhuowen's eyes were solemn. The God Slayer halberd gave him an extremely strong sense of danger. It actually directly pierced through the ancient Buddha shadow. Zhuowen did not hesitate to take out the immortal culling sword, the 5-foul seal, and the Fushi cauldron. He placed the immortal culling sword and the 5-foul seal into the Fushi cauldron. On the other hand, ripples spread out from Zhuowen's right foot as he suddenly retreated at a speed faster than teleportation. Tao intent. Yuan Hongwen's eyes revealed a trace of confusion and a wisp of understanding when he felt the ripples that spread out from Zhuowen's feet. He muttered in a low voice. He also took a step with his right foot and an extremely weak ripple spread out. His speed actually increased greatly. What? Yuan Hongwen is comprehending Tao intent. Zhuowen's pupils constricted when he saw this scene. He stared with some astonishment at Yuan Hongwen, who was moving forward and whose eyes revealed an expression of enlightenment. Chapter 1801. God-slaying Yuan Hongwen is really an extraordinary genius. Even though he's already touched upon Tao insight, but he's able to comprehend Tao insight from you and utilize it. This is too terrifying. Within Chen Shi's sea of consciousness, Xiao Hei's voice was filled with a serious expression. Zhuowen's gaze was serious because Yuan Hongwen was more difficult to deal with than he'd expected. If I'm not wrong, Yuan Hongwen has already taken half a step into the threshold of Tao insight. If he advances a step further, then he'll be able to attain half-step Tao insight. Zhuowen spoke in a low voice. At this moment, a trace of a sense of urgency arose in Zhuowen's heart because this battle was truly too important to him. I must seize the first in the battle of gods. This is the only thing I can do to save Chen Shui. I'll absolutely not allow failure this time. As he spoke up to hear, Zhuowen's right hand pulled out the five-fowl seal from within the Fushi cauldron. After that, the five-fowl seal was suddenly struck out by Zhuowen, causing countless strands of green qi to spread out and condense into the enormous phantoms of a tiger, deer, bear, ape, and bird. After the amplification of the Fushi cauldron's pressure, the might of the five-fowl seal rose to an extremely terrifying level, causing the phantoms of the tiger, deer, bear, ape, and bird to be countless times stronger than before. Yuan Hongwen's expression was calm like water as he slowly followed behind the god-slaying halberd. When he saw the phantoms of the tiger, deer, bear, ape, and bird flashing over, a wisp of a mocking smile appeared on the corners of his mouth. Bang! The first to bear the brunt of the attack was the ferocious tiger silhouette. The god-slayer halberd merely stopped at the tiger silhouette for a breath's time before it pierced through the tiger silhouette. The tiger silhouette completely collapsed under the attack of the god-slayer halberd. After the ferocious tiger collapsed, the god-slaying halberd didn't slow down in the slightest, and it actually successively pierced through the remaining phantoms of the deer, bear, ape, and bird. It's useless. Your cauldron is able to provide a saint artifact with pressure, and that's rather strange. But my god-slaying halberd isn't an ordinary earthly immortal saint artifact, and it's an existence that's extremely close to a heavenly immortal saint artifact. Whether it's the five-bird seal or the immortal slaughtering sword in your hands, even if they have been bestowed with pressure, so what? They can't stop the god-slaying halberd at all, Yuan Hongwen said proudly. Zhuowen narrowed his eyes. He was not surprised that the five-bird seal was broken in an instant. After all, the five-bird seal was obtained from Xuehui. With Xuehui's strength at the early stage of the Earth Immortal realm, how powerful could the earthly immortal saint artifacts he possessed be? However, the immortal slaughtering sword was different. This immortal slaughtering sword was He-Yu's natal immortal weapon and was much stronger than the five-fowl seal. Moreover, with the support of the Fushi cauldron, Zhuowen did not believe that the immortal slaughtering sword could not block the god-slaying halberd. 20 breaths, slash. Zhuowen suddenly pulled out the immortal slaughtering sword. Then, with a twist of his right wrist, he threw the immortal slaughtering sword out. Whoosh! The immortal slaughtering sword continued to spin in the air, emitting an endless amount of white light. As the immortal slaughtering sword spun, an ocean-like pressure gushed out from within the sword. Clang! The immortal slaughtering sword and the god-slaying halberd collided in an instant. Then, an extremely ear-piercing explosion burst out. Invisible ripples spread out, as if the entire space had fallen into distortion and collapse. He actually blocked it. Yuan Hongwen looked at the immortal slaughtering sword that blocked the god-slaying halberd with surprise. Then, he snorted coldly and stepped out with his right foot. A ripple spread out. After seeing Zhuowen use the power of Dao intent, his understanding of Dao intent had increased by hundreds and thousands. Even though he'd seen Zhuowen utilize Dao insight in the past, he'd only observed Zhuowen from afar as a spectator. For example, when he fought Zhuowen while immersed in the battle now, the effect of the Dao insight on him was naturally much deeper. Yuan Hongwen swept to the front of the god-slaying halberd. He lifted his right foot and kicked the halberd's tail. Countless celestial core power surged on his right foot, causing the god-slaying halberd's speed to soar to the extreme. Whoosh! The god-slaying halberd violently swept out and directly blocked the immortal slaughtering sword, causing it to continuously retreat. Zhuowen, if this is all you have, then you've really disappointed me, Yuan Hongwen said indifferently. Zhuowen's gaze was cold and indifferent. He said indifferently, "The champion of the battle of gods belongs to me, Zhuowen. Yuan Hongwen, even if you have extraordinary natural talent and monstrous strength, you'll still become my stepping stone. If you want to see the true Dao intent, then I'll fulfill your wish." Zhuowen suddenly stomped his right foot. Then, terrifying invisible ripples suffused his body. This was the power of Dao intent. At this moment, Zhuowen didn't hold back the strength of his Dao insight any longer, and he completely revealed it. The first-level Dao intent's amplification to Zhuowen was truly too great. It had practically doubled his overall strength. The power of this invisible ripple was so vast that it actually filled the entire path of life and death. Under the influence of this invisible ripple, countless martial artists who were originally on the path of life and death involuntarily spat out mouthfuls of blood. Their eyes were filled with horror. What kind of power is this? It's so terrifying. My defense is actually unable to block the power of this ripple. An uproar resounded, and all the martial artists were shocked. Fortunately, although this invisible ripple ignored their defense, its power was not very strong. With the physical quality of these martial artists, they were still able to withstand it. Yuan Hongwen was also affected by this ripple. His entire body shook, and his expression changed slightly. But soon, his eyes were blazing with passion. Dao intent, it really is Dao intent. Zhuoan, I really didn't expect that you've actually comprehended Dao intent to such an extent. As he spoke, the battle intent in Yuan Hongwen's eyes became even stronger. He took a step forward, and with the god-slaying halberd in his right hand, he went straight for Zhuoan's body. Zhuoan's eyes flashed, and then his right hand formed a seal. Suddenly, his body was divided into three. One was his body, the second was the perfection saint body, and the third was the mind-strength doppelganger. This Zhuoan actually has two doppelgangers. Looking at Zhuoan who had divided into three, many martial artists who were watching revealed shocked expressions. They could feel that the aura of Zhuoan's three doppelgangers was extremely powerful and terrifying. Go! Zhuoan's body used Dao intent to support the two doppelgangers. Then, the perfection saint body immediately grasped the celestial slaying sword, which had been sent flying, in his hand. The dark golden light that erupted from his body became more and more intense. At this moment, the perfection saint body, with the support of Dao intent, was twice as tough as before. The peak of the earthly immortal realm was completely vulnerable in front of the saint body. The mind-strength doppelganger, with the support of Dao intent, was even more proficient in using the devouring curse prohibition. The power of the devouring curse prohibition was also twice as strong as before. Yuan Hongwen, the first place of the divine battle belongs to me. I will kill anyone who stands in my way. Zhuoan's body emitted a cold light from his eyes. He used Dao intent to support his own celestial technique. Then, he used the only three celestial techniques he had. Slaughtering Finger of the Underworld. Lone Peak. Celestial Technique Asking Buddha. The three celestial techniques, with the support of Dao intent, were many times more powerful than before. The moment these three celestial techniques appeared, the entire life and death path began to tremble violently. This time, the trembling was even more intense than when Yuan Hongwen used the landslide of 10 directions. The towering tree in the life and death path shook violently under this tremor. Countless branches swayed and shattered, and countless leaves fell, forming a terrifying rain of leaves. The two doppelganger and the three celestial techniques were the most powerful force that Zhuoan could use at the moment. This force was infinitely close to the early stage of the celestial immortal realm. Even an early-stage celestial immortal realm cultivator would have to retreat when facing Zhuoan. Yuan Hongwen's pupils shrank slightly. He stared at the perfection divine being and mind-strength doppelganger that were rushing toward him. The aura of these two doppelganger was extremely terrifying. He knew that it was the influence of Dao intent. With Yuan Hongwen's current strength, it was not difficult to deal with these two doppelganger. However, he was afraid of the three celestial techniques behind the two doppelganger. These three celestial techniques were much more terrifying than any of the previous ones. According to his estimation, if he faced these three celestial techniques directly, he would be in some danger. What a powerful Dao intent! This is the power that I have always wanted to pursue. However, Yuan Hongwen did not show any fear. Instead, he laughed wildly, and his eyes were full of fanaticism. God-slaying halberd, blood technique. Yuan Hongwen bit his thumb and then gently wiped the halberd's body. Suddenly, the surface of the god-slaying halberd exuded a large amount of blood qi. As the blood qi erupted, it transformed into all kinds of phantoms. These phantoms were all in human form. There were old people, young people, men, and women. They were like souls. Yuan Hongwen placed the halberd at his feet and then continued to form seals with both hands. Suddenly, the phantoms formed by the blood qi began to merge and form two extremely large blood shadows. The moment these two blood shadows appeared, a large blood-colored saber condensed in their hands. With a roar, they rushed toward the perfection divine being and mind strength doppelganger. Bang! 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 These two blood shadows were not weak. With a monstrous blood qi, they blocked the attacks of the perfection divine being and mind strength doppelganger. After doing this, Yuan Hongwen raised his head and stared at the three celestial techniques that were crushing down on him. Tao intent. This time, let's determine the winner. At this point, Yuan Hongwen's eyes became extremely serious. Then, he quickly formed seals with both hands. In a breath's time, he continuously formed strange seals. As Yuan Hongwen formed seals again and again, the aura of the god-slaying halberd in front of him became more and more terrifying. It was as if there was a primitive beast sealed in the god-slaying halberd. As the seal began to be undone, the primitive beast was about to break out. God-slaying. Yuan Hongwen bit the tip of his tongue and spat out a mouthful of blood essence onto the surface of the god-slaying halberd. Suddenly, the aura of the god-slaying halberd soared to the extreme. Then, the surface began to fall off and disintegrate. The god-slaying halberd shattered into countless pieces of iron that were as black as ice. These pieces of iron had thick traces of blood. Chapter 1802. Devil transformation. Yuan Hongwen's gaze was calm as he slowly walked out. Suddenly, the blood-red armor in front of him disintegrated and surged into Yuan Hongwen's body as if he was wearing armor. The moment he put on the blood-red armor, Yuan Hongwen's entire temperament changed. He looked up at the three celestial techniques that were crushing down from above and growled, "Among the younger generation, only you, Zhuowen, can force me, Yuan Hongwen, to use the god-slaying technique. I don't believe you can win with this move." As he spoke, Yuan Hongwen made a grabbing motion with his right hand. Immediately, continuous rumbling sounds came from his body as if thousands of bombs were exploding around him at the same time. The space within tens of thousands of miles with Yuan Hongwen as the center began to strangely collapse. Within the tens of thousands of miles of collapse, terrifying and huge bloody hands suddenly stretched out. There were too many bloody hands. When they stretched out, they actually rapidly rotated in a counterclockwise direction, forming a terrifying and bloodthirsty storm. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The storm reached the sky and shattered the world. Moreover, as the storm became more and more violent, the bloody hands in the surrounding space also grew more and more. The pungent smell of blood also spread continuously in the surroundings. The moment the storm formed by the countless bloody hands formed, the path of life and death shook even more violently. Even the surface of the sealed dimension scroll that sealed the entrance of the towering tree showed signs of collapsing. Zhuowen narrowed his eyes. He also felt the terror of the blood-red storm, especially the bloody hands in the storm, which gave him a dangerous feeling. The blood-red storm was extremely fast and swept into the sky in an instant. At this moment, the three celestial techniques also fell one after another. Rumble. In an instant, the blood-red storm and the three celestial techniques collided. Extremely terrifying waves of air burst out between the two. Then, the entire space of the path of life and death began to continuously explode. At the same time, Yuan Hongwen took a step with his right foot and directly swept towards Zhuowen in the sky. However, Zhuowen was not afraid. He took a step with his right foot and raised the power of his Tao intent to the extreme as he also swept towards Yuan Hongwen. Bang! 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 The two collided in an instant. Then, in the explosion of the terrifying bloody storm and immortal technique power, deafening sounds of collision broke out again and again. The speed of the two was simply too fast. Countless cultivators on the life and death path could not even see the figures of Zhuowen and Yuan Hongwen clearly. Moreover, as the two of them continued to fight, the power of the blood-red storm and the three immortal techniques became more and more terrifying, almost covering the entire path of life and death. Retreat! Retreat! Many warriors on the path of life and death looked bitter. The battle between Zhuowen and Yuan Hongwen was too terrifying. It was beyond the scope of an earth immortal. If this goes on, won't the path of life and death collapse? Ji Chenyang smiled bitterly. Shi Bin, Kong Haogan, Dong Chishin, and Situ Nyenyue fell into silence. Their shock was no less than Ji Chenyan's, perhaps even greater. "Milord." Behind the dead end, among a group of cultivators, Xue Hui stared excitedly at the tall figure fighting Yuan Hongwen, his entire body trembling. Brother Zhuo is so powerful. On the other side, old man Zhu Shong also raised his head. He stared at Zhuowen, who was like a ghost in the void, with a complicated expression. He still clearly remembered that when he first met Zhuo Wen, this Zhuo Wenshang had to take out the elemental spirit bomb to threaten Feng Ruji. Later on, this Zhuo Wen used all kinds of schemes to kill Feng Ruji, and rose to prominence. Until now, Zhuo Wen's battle strength was close to that of Yuan Hongwen, who was at the peak of the Earth Immortal realm. Countless elites in the central region who participated in the divine battle could only look up to him in awe. It could be said that Zhuo Wen's progress was far faster than old man Zhu Shong's. Perhaps this is a true monstrous genius. Old man Zhu Shong sighed inside. His complicated feelings for Zhuo Wen had completely turned into admiration. He had never seen someone like Zhuo Wen, who could rise up so quickly and with such a sweeping attitude, in the Central Plains. Even Yuan Hongwen, who was known as the Son of God, didn't rise as quickly as Zhuowen. Bang! 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 Suddenly, the countless bloody hands in the bloody storm gathered together. Then, from the eye of the storm, a ferocious and terrifying bloody hand stretched out. The surface of this huge bloody hand was actually made up of countless tiny bloody hands. It was obvious that this huge bloody hand was made up of all the bloody hands in the bloody storm. God-slaying ripping hand. Yuan Hongwen suddenly punched out and collided with Zhuowen's fist. Then, borrowing the terrifying recoil, he immediately retreated. His hands quickly formed a seal, and the terrifying bloody hand stretched out and grabbed the three immortal techniques that were in a deadlock with the bloody storm. Boom! The bloody hand crushed the slaughtering finger of Akron, followed by the lone peak, and finally the huge ancient Buddha shadow. This blood-red hand was truly too terrifying. It practically crushed the three immortal arts into pieces with an all-powerful might, and then it flashed explosively towards Zhuo Wen with irresistible force. Zhuo Wen's pupils shrank. He stared at the terrifying bloody hand that was rushing towards him. His right foot stepped in the void, and his speed soared to the extreme as he retreated. It was a pity that the bloody hand was extremely strange. Countless small bloody hands emerged from the surface of the bloody hand and drilled into the void. When these bloody hands drilled out again, they had unknowingly appeared under his feet. These bloody hands kept shaking, and an invisible force spread out, causing Zhuowen's speed to suddenly decrease. The huge bloody hand instantly closed the distance between Zhuowen and himself. Three-body integration. A strong sense of crisis emerged in Zhuowen's heart. Then, he shouted loudly. Suddenly, he called back the perfection saint physique and mind strength doppelganger that were still entangled with the two bloody shadows and merged them into his body. Then, Zhuowen clenched his right fist, and a dark golden color burst out from his body. At the same time, a mysterious power of the Wei lingered on his fist. Bang! 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 Just like that, Zhuowen threw a punch. Wherever the fist force passed, the wind whistled and exploded. It was as if countless bombs had exploded at the same time. Boom! Zhuo Wen's figure was as tiny as an ant before the gigantic bloody hand. However, it was precisely this tiny ant-like existence that caused the bloody hand to explode into a bloody mist that spread in all directions with a single punch. Bang! 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 Clouds of terrifying bloody mist burst out from the surface of the bloody hand. The bloody mist spread out and formed a bloody rain that fell from the void. Zhuowen rushed out of the bloody mist with an imposing aura and swept toward Yuan Hongwen, who was behind the bloody hand. Zhuowen, you were too careless. If the bloody hand was so easy to break, would it still be my trump card? Yuan Hongwen revealed a strange smile, and Zhuowen's figure froze. He secretly cursed in his heart. Unfortunately, it was too late. Behind Zhuowen, the bloody mist that had exploded into a cloud began to wriggle. Then, it wriggled faster and faster, and finally condensed into a huge bloody hand. This bloody hand was extremely fast, and it grabbed Zhuowen in its palm. It seems that the outcome has been decided. Looking at Zhuowen, who had disappeared in the palm of the bloody hand, many warriors below heaved a sigh of relief. The battle between Zhuowen and Yuan Hongwen was too terrifying. The entire path of life and death was affected. If the two continued to fight, they were afraid that they would be deeply affected. This was not the result they wanted to see. Zhuowen lost. Ji Chenyan's beautiful eyes frowned as she murmured in a low voice. Kong Haogan's eyes were cold as he sneered, Yuan Hongwen's move is too terrifying. Even an ordinary peak earthly immortal would find it hard to withstand, let alone Zhuowen who was directly hit. Since the outcome has been decided, young Master Yuan should have opened the sealed dimension scroll, right? Shibin shouted at Yuan Hongwen. The others on the path of life and death nodded. They did not want to stay here for a moment longer, especially when they felt the fear from before. Many of them had a shadow in their hearts. Yuan Hongwen's eyes flickered. He quietly hovered above the bloody hand and looked at it quietly. His brows were slightly knitted, and he did not pay attention to Shibin's words. Young Master Yuan, what do you mean? Do you want to lock all of us in this path of life and death? Shibin said with some dissatisfaction. Yuan Hongwen indifferently stared at Shibin and said, noisy. If you're not convinced, come up and fight me. Shibin's face froze, but he did not reply. The terrifying strength that Yuan Hongwen had just displayed was definitely not something he could contend against. If he went up, wouldn't he be asking for humiliation? Who said that Zhuowen lost? He. Bang. Before Yuan Hongwen could finish his words, the bloody hand below directly collapsed into countless blood mists. A figure filled with monstrous demonic energy suddenly rushed out. Immortal art demonic change. As this figure rushed out, a sinister and demonic voice was emitted. He hasn't lost yet. Yuan Hongwen's eyes narrowed as he indifferently finished his words. Everyone's gazes converged on the figure that rushed out. Soon after, everyone sucked in a breath of cold air. The figure's entire body was filled with monstrous demonic energy. His black hair actually dragged to his feet, and his demonic eyes were cold and dark. The immortal art Buddha demonic change had a total of 3 stages. They were the Buddha demonic change, and Buddha demonic change. Moreover, the power of each stage would increase by hundreds or thousands. Zhuowen had already thoroughly comprehended the Buddha demonic change. In the later period of time, he had consulted Shiji about the demonic change. However, the demonic change was even more profound than the Buddha demonic change. Therefore, Zhuowen's cultivation speed was extremely slow. Until now, he had not completely comprehended the demonic change. However, when he was grabbed by the bloody hand, in the instant of life and death crisis, Zhuowen's mind quickly operated. He began to recall Shiji's teachings, and actually completely comprehended the demonic change. Chapter 1803. The sealed realm scroll shattered. Zhuowen stood in the rain of blood. He stared coldly at Yuan Hongwen, who was wearing his blood armor. Whoosh! Suddenly, the bloody hand that had exploded into a bloody mist wriggled again. It reformed into a huge bloody hand and attacked Zhuowen again. Zhuowen's demonic eyes glowed fiercely. He casually clenched his right hand. Suddenly, demonic aura surged out. Then, the terrifying demonic aura began to wriggle and shrink. It turned into a demonic hand that was no weaker than the bloody hand. Bang! The demon hand gave off a heaven-toppling aura as it grabbed onto the blood-red hand and pulled, causing the blood-red hand to be torn into a bloody mist. After repeating this several times, the bloody hand finally lost its effect. After it exploded into a bloody mist, it showed no signs of reforming. Zhuowen slowly raised his head. His demonic eyes were like ice. His hair was as black as ink. His aura was extremely cold. At this moment, Zhuowen was like an emotionless demon. He had unparalleled power and was not easily affected by external things. Moreover, Zhuowen had the experience of becoming a demon. Therefore, He did not reject or feel uncomfortable with the demonic aura in his body. Instead, he could use it with ease. The Fighting Buddha Demon Saint's famous immortal technique, the Buddha Demon Transformation. It is indeed impressive. Yuan Hongwen's gaze became serious. After the devil transformation, the pressure Zhuo Wen gave him had increased by a lot, especially when he saw those cold and emotionless demonic eyes. Even Yuan Hongwen's expression changed slightly. The first place of the divine battle will be mine, Zhuo Wen murmured. Then, he flicked his right hand and summoned the Blood Immortal. Master, why are you looking for the little Blood Immortal? The moment the Blood Immortal appeared, she immediately smiled at Zhuo Wen. Especially when she saw the demonic aura around Zhuo Wen, the Blood Immortal's heart skipped a beat. The current Zhuo Wen gave her a very strong sense of threat. It was as if Zhuo Wen could destroy her if he wanted. Thinking of this, the Blood Immortal's attitude towards Zhuo Wen became even more attentive and flattering. The smile on her face became even brighter. Enter the cauldron and hold on for 100 breaths. If you can't hold on for 100 breaths, you will bear the consequences. Zhuo Wen lifted the Blood Immortal with his right hand and shoved her into the Fushi cauldron without hesitation. The Blood Immortal did not even have time to react before she was shoved into the cauldron by Zhuo Wen. This made the Blood Immortal was even more for blood. Zhuo Wen. She could not see through Zhuo Wen's strength. She could not see through Zhuo Wen translation. When the Blood Immortal saw Zhuo Wen's cold demonic eyes, she could not help but shiver. She still remembered what Zhuo Wen said before. She knew that if she really left the Fushi cauldron, what awaited her would be a merciless punishment. Thinking of Zhuo Wen's merciless punishment, the Blood Immortal could not help but shiver. A trace of fear rose in her heart. She did not dare to come out of the Fushi cauldron. This cauldron has a powerful aura. If you can hold on for 100 breaths, this cauldron will give you an extremely powerful aura. By then, your strength will temporarily increase by a lot. Help me this time, and in the future, when I am strong enough, I will set you free. Zhuo Wen's voice transmitted into the Blood Immortal's mind. The Blood Immortal's pupils shrank as if she was injected with chicken blood. Freedom. This malefic wants to set me free. No matter what, I will hold on for 100 breaths. For my freedom, I will hold on for 100 breaths even if I have to give up my life. The Blood Immortal was extremely excited. She was almost incoherent. She began to seriously resist the aura within the Fushi cauldron. As she sat quietly in the Fushi cauldron, she found that the aura within the cauldron was constantly entering her body. Her entire body was filled with an indescribably powerful aura. Zhuo Wen silently looked at the Blood Immortal who was quietly sitting in the Fushi cauldron. This was the first time he had tried to give the aura within the Fushi cauldron to the Blood Immortal. Now, it seemed like this experiment was feasible. The aura within 100 breaths should be enough to delay Yuan Hongwen, who is at the peak of the Earth Immortal realm. I must be the first to break out of the path of life. Zhuo Wen murmured in a low voice. He took a step forward with his right foot. Demonic chi surged from his body and formed an extremely terrifying and ferocious demonic shadow in the void behind him. Yuan Hongwen, you and I still have 100 breaths of time to fight. If you can't defeat me in 100 breaths of time, then the first place of the divine tournament will be mine. Zhuo Wen, who was walking in the void, said in an indifferent voice. It was like a muffled thunder, deafening and endless. Yuan Hongwen solemnly looked at the Blood Immortal who was put into the Fushi cauldron by Zhuo Wen. His eyes flashed, but he laughed and said, 100 breaths is enough. As he spoke, Yuan Hongwen took a step forward with his right foot. The blood armor on his body spewed out clouds of terrifying blood mist. The blood mist gushed out and started to wriggle. In the end, it condensed into a terrifying blood storm. Following that, Yuan Hongwen took one step at a time. With every step, the blood armor spewed out a terrifying blood mist. This blood mist could create a terrifying blood-colored storm. When Yuan Hongwen took his 10th step, the 10 blood-red storms began to condense, forming an even more terrifying blood-red storm. In the eye of the blood-red storm, a blood-red hand that was even more terrifying than before stretched out. The blood hand that was formed this time was too terrifying. It was many times more terrifying than the blood hand that Yuan Hongwen used before. Zhuowen also took a step forward in the void. With every step, a monstrous demonic aura formed a demonic sword. After 10 steps, 10 demonic swords formed and revolved around Zhuowen's body. Condense. Zhuowen pointed with his right sword finger. The 10 demonic swords merged together and formed a terrifying demonic sword that was thousands of feet long. Bang! 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 The blood hand and the demonic sword heavily clashed together. The entire path of life and death began to shake violently again. The other warriors on the path of life and death revealed bitter expressions. At this moment, staying on the path of life and death was simply torture for them. 10 breath. Zhuowen silently counted the time. At the same time, demonic aura gushed out. He stepped on the demonic sword and continuously clashed with the blood hand. 20 breath. 80 breath. When Zhuowen counted to 80 breaths, Yuan Hongwen grinned and formed a seal with both hands. He said, "Zhuowen, I said that 100 breaths is enough to defeat you. I mean it." After he finished speaking, the blood armor around Yuan Hongwen shattered. Countless blood lights gathered together and formed an extremely terrifying blood mist. Then, the blood mist squirmed and formed 2 huge blood hands again. 2 crimson hands grabbed at the void, directly grabbing at Zhuowen, as if wanting to crush Zhuowen alive. Zhuowen's eyes were still cold and indifferent as he stared at the 2 enormous bloody hands. He didn't hesitate to utilize the first level of Dao insight. Instantly, the might of the devil's sword beneath his feet doubled, and it directly slashed the bloody hands before him into 2. Then, the demonic sword flicked up and cut through the void. It quickly slashed twice at the 2 huge blood hands that were reaching over. For a moment, demonic light soared into the sky. Strange demonic shadows appeared in the 2 sword lights. Fart! Fart! The 2 blood hands were also cut into blood mist. However, the 3 blood hands were not ordinary. After being cut off, they reformed and were extremely difficult to deal with. Yuan Hongwen quietly looked at the Dao insight that Zhuowen used. The understanding in his eyes became more and more intense. He had a deeper understanding of Dao insight. 90 breath. Zhuowen muttered softly. His right hand grabbed at the void behind him. The demonic shadow that appeared behind him was directly grabbed by him. Then, Zhuowen unceremoniously crushed the demonic shadow and gathered it into the demonic sword. Bang! 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 The demonic sword slashed out again. The 3 blood hands instantly collapsed, but the sword light of the demonic sword did not weaken and rushed towards Yuan Hongwen. Yuan Hongwen's expression changed. He snorted coldly and bit the tip of his tongue. He spat out a mouthful of blood essence. The moment the blood essence was spat out, it immediately exploded into a blood mist. The blood mist wriggled and stretched out another huge blood hand to meet the demonic sword. This blood hand was not ordinary. It actually blocked the demonic sword for a breath of time, which bought a lot of time for Yuan Hongwen to escape. At the same time, the other 3 blood hands reformed and rushed over, wrapping around the demonic sword. For a moment, the demonic sword faintly felt tired under the attack of the 4 blood hands. 100 breath. Zhuowen's eyes shone brightly. Then, he stepped back with his right foot and immediately retreated to the side of the Fushi cauldron. At the same time, the demonic sword had reached its limit. However, Zhuowen formed a seal with both hands and detonated the demonic sword. A shocking explosion sounded and the 4 blood hands were directly engulfed by the explosion. Then, Zhuowen grabbed the blood immortal from the Fushi cauldron. He pointed at the gloomy Yuan Hongwen and said, "Hold this person and buy me some time." At this moment, the blood immortal's eyes were red. Her entire body was filled with a terrifying pressure, causing her aura to reach an extremely terrifying level. However, the blood immortal did not lose her mind. She nodded at Zhuowen and roared as she rushed towards Yuan Hongwen. At this moment, the pressure on the blood immortal's body was too terrifying. She needed to vent properly. And this time, the target was obviously Yuan Hongwen who was in front of her. Scram! The moment the blood immortal rushed over, Yuan Hongwen's face was gloomy. He grabbed with his right hand and countless blood mist rushed out, forming a huge blood hand that grabbed at the blood immortal. Boom! The blood immortal roared and struck out with her right claw. Suddenly, an invisible pressure spread out and formed a violent hurricane that blocked the blood hand. The blood immortal rushed towards Yuan Hongwen without any regard for her life. Yuan Hongwen snorted and used his supreme techniques to block the blood immortal. However, at this moment, the blood immortal seemed to have gone crazy and was extremely difficult to deal with. Against Yuan Hongwen's powerful attacks, she actually used the terrifying pressure in her body to dissolve them. For a moment, she actually managed to entangle Yuan Hongwen. Zhuowen's eyes were cold. He raised his head and looked at the sealed dimension scroll above him. He took a step forward and instantly arrived before the scroll. "Break for me." Zhuowen took a deep breath and fiercely punched out. Countless demonic qi appeared on the surface of his fist like a storm. Then, a layer of Dao will was added to this attack. Catcher. Chapter 1804. Blood eye. More and more cracks appeared on the dimensional ceiling scroll, and in the end, they enveloped the entire scroll. This punch gathered all of Zhuowen's strength, and with the support of the first level of Dao insight, it caused the might of this punch to reach an unprecedented level. The shattering of the sealed dimension scroll caused the entire path of life and death to shake violently. The shaking this time was more violent than any other time. Many warriors were terrified. At this moment, the blood immortal seemed to have been injected with chicken blood. Her terrifying pressure forced Yuan Hongwen to continuously retreat. Yuan Hongwen's eyes were gloomy. Especially when he saw the sealed dimension scroll continuously shattering, Yuan Hongwen's pupils shrank. "Zhuowen!" Yuan Hongwen roared angrily. A terrifying blood mist erupted from his body. A vast and terrifying aura suddenly exploded from his body. God-slaying blood eye. Yuan Hongwen's eyes became extremely serious. He bit the tip of his tongue and spat out another mouthful of essence blood. His face was pale and bloodless, and his aura was much weaker. The essence blood fell on the blood mist in front of him, and it actually caused the blood mist to violently wriggle. The blood immortal's right claw suddenly slammed into the blood mist with a monstrous pressure. Then, the crazed blood immortal suddenly revealed a terrified expression. She only felt an extremely terrifying and irresistible power directly explode towards her. Poochie. The blood immortal spat out a mouthful of blood. The bone spikes all over her body were broken, and clouds of blood mist burst out. Her eyes became dim and lifeless, and then she was suddenly sent flying. The moment the blood immortal was sent flying, the wriggling blood mist suddenly exploded. It actually burst out countless bloodlines. These bloodlines spread out and actually turned into numerous ferocious and terrifying blood eyes in the sky above the path of life and death. There were simply too many blood eyes. They almost covered the entire sky above the path of life and death. It was as if the entire world was being watched by these countless blood eyes. The moment the blood eyes appeared in the sky, countless warriors on the path of life and death covered their eyes. Tears of blood actually flowed out of their eyes. Shrill screams continuously came out of these warriors' mouths. "Don't make eye contact with these blood eyes." Ji Chenyang immediately lowered his head, not daring to look at the countless blood eyes. Instead, he quietly observed the battle in the sky with his divine sense. It wasn't just Ji Chenyang. Some of the martial artists who had reached the middle stage of the Earth Immortal Realm and above retracted their gazes in time. Those martial artists who had met the blood eyes' gaze let out shrill cries. It would take a long time for their eyes to recover. Zhuowen's expression changed slightly. He waved his sleeve and put the blood immortal into his spirit ring. Then, he punched out again and turned the sealed boundary scroll into dust. However, it was also at this moment that the power of the countless blood-red eyes swept over and instantly covered the entire space. Zhuowen, who was originally about to leave, actually came to a sudden halt under this strange power. "Dao insight!" Zhuowen shouted in a low voice and gathered all of his will of the way on his feet. Invisible ripples spread out from the soles of his feet. After that, his stagnant body suddenly stepped into the air, intending to leave completely. Explode. Yuan Hongwen's eyes were crimson red as he roared in a low voice. Suddenly, the countless blood-red eyes in the space opened wide in anger. Then, these blood-red eyes began to explode. Kacha. Kacha. Under the explosion of countless blood-red eyes, the space formed by the life and death path seemed so insignificant at this moment. It began to collapse completely. In the life and death path, many martial artists stared blankly at this scene. There was only endless fear left in their eyes. No one had expected that the space of the life and death path would collapse and collapse. What kind of power was needed to do this? Yuan Hongwen, you're crazy. Kong Haoqian's expression changed greatly. He hurriedly used all of the available skills in his spirit ring to form an extremely powerful defense around his body. Not only Kong Haoqian, but Ji Chenyang, Shi Bin, Sichu Nianyue, Dong Qixin, and the other martial artists on the life and death path also used all of their skills without hesitation. They knew very well that if the space of the life and death path really collapsed, then their fate would be extremely miserable. If they could not block this terrifying collapsing force, then they would most likely die. When everyone on the life and death path used all of their skills to defend, Zhuowen, who was originally rushing towards the exit, also felt this extremely terrifying explosive force. The explosion of the blood-red eyes was too terrifying. It was as if the entire space had collapsed because of it. A terrifying tearing hurricane swept over, causing Zhuowen's expression to change greatly. His rushing figure suddenly stagnated in mid-air under the influence of this terrifying force. Zhuowen, you won't be able to get first place. Yuan Hongwen's face was pale and bloodless, but his eyes were as red as blood. He stared fixedly at Zhuowen, who was above him, and made a grabbing motion with his right hand. Suddenly, the exploding blood eyes around him suddenly condensed into a huge blood eye. This blood-red eye was too big. It was as if the sky of the life and death path had disappeared and was replaced by this blood-red eye. This huge blood-red eye stared at Zhuowen's figure, and then slowly blinked. Suddenly, the surrounding space collapsed even faster. Zhuowen spat out a mouthful of blood, and a terrifying bloody mist erupted from his body. Zhuowen's eyes were filled with horror. Without hesitation, he used the 3 immortal techniques on his body. At the same time, he supported himself with Dao Will, trying to break this terrifying binding force. Unfortunately, the blood-red eye was too terrifying. Even with the support of Dao Will, Zhuowen's 3 immortal techniques were still unable to break this terrifying binding force. When Zhuowen was stared at by the blood-red eye, the bloody mist on his body kept surging and erupting, causing his face to turn even paler. This is my strongest immortal technique. Back then, I relied on this immortal technique to defeat the late stage of the Earth Immortal Realm. Now that I'm at the peak of the Earth Immortal Realm, this immortal technique is enough to defeat the early stage of the Heaven Immortal Realm. Zhuowen, you forced me to use this strongest immortal technique. Although you've lost, it's still an honorable defeat. Yuan Hongwen stood on top of the blood-red eye. His hair danced in the wind, and his eyes were extremely ferocious. If one looked closely, Yuan Hongwen's breathing was extremely rapid. Obviously, using the blood-red eye had a great impact on him. Help me. Zhuowen's eyes were filled with determination. He took out the mysterious eyeball that was still playing dead from his collar. The mysterious eyeball glanced at Zhuowen, and as if it understood what he meant, it shook up and down. Then, an extremely terrifying black lightning suddenly flashed out of its pupil. This black lightning looked only the size of a palm, but when it finally appeared in the void, it suddenly expanded and instantly turned into a huge black Qilin. The black Qilin was surrounded by black lightning. As it stomped on the ground, countless black lightning bolts burst out, making the black Qilin look like a god or a demon. The moment the black Qilin appeared, countless black lightning threads lingered around Zhuowen's body. The powerful restrictive force of the blood-red eye suddenly collapsed, and Zhuowen regained his freedom of movement. Let's go. Without any hesitation, Zhuowen immediately took a step forward and rushed upwards. What kind of power is this? Yuan Hongwen's eyes narrowed, and he stared at the black Qilin that was formed by the black lightning. The aura of the black Qilin was so terrifying that it made him feel terrified. Boom! The black Qilin was so fast that it arrived in front of Yuan Hongwen in an instant. Yuan Hongwen immediately retreated without hesitation. Then, he pointed his right hand at the void, and the huge blood-red eye blocked in front of him. Sizzle, 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 sizzle. The black Qilin rushed toward the blood-red eye, and then countless black lightning threads spread out and enveloped the blood-red eye. Under the influence of the black lightning, the blood-red eye faintly showed signs of being weakened. Yuan Hongwen's eyes narrowed, and he revealed a look of disbelief. Without hesitation, Yuan Hongwen directly detonated the huge blood-red eye. The resulting explosion frightened even Yuan Hongwen. He spat out a mouthful of blood and retreated continuously. Yuan Hongwen, Zhuowen, you two lunatics, are you trying to kill all of us? The moment they saw the huge blood-red eye explode, many warriors on the life and death path cried out in fear. This huge blood-red eye was more terrifying than the countless blood-red eyes before. If it exploded, the life and death path would definitely not be able to withstand it. Unfortunately, Yuan Hongwen did not care about the warriors' cries at all, and still detonated the blood-red eye. Rumble. Finally, the life and death path, which was already on the verge of collapse, shook even more violently this time. Then, the space above the life and death path began to collapse, like a mountain that had been detonated by an explosion. Puff, puff. Then, many warriors on the life and death path spat out a mouthful of blood. Their faces were pale, and they could only retreat step by step to offset the terrifying collapse force. Did I lose? Yuan Hongwen slowly fell from the void. He stared at the figure that finally disappeared at the exit of the path of life, and a bitter smile appeared on his face. He had really underestimated Zhuowen. No one expected that Zhuowen would hide such a move in the end. It was really unexpected. At this moment, in the square, the black vortex that represented the life and death path appeared at the edge of the square, while the white vortex that represented the life and death path was located in the center of the square. In the square, many warriors were waiting with anticipation. Their eyes fell on the white vortex. After a few days, they knew that someone would come out of the life and death path. I wonder who will be the first to come out this time? If it's not Yuan Hongwen, then it's Zhuowen. Both of them are geniuses. The first place will definitely be among the two of them. Don't forget, there's still Ji Chenyang from the Eternal Family. Her reputation is not any weaker than Yuan Hongwen. She might also be the first to come out. Voices of discussion constantly resounded. Everyone was looking forward to who would be the first to come out of the life and death path. Even the dozen heavenly immortal patriarchs and divine master Do Hua who were sitting on the praying mats looked at the life and death path with anticipation. Rumble. Chapter 1805. Primal Chaos War God. Boom. 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 The explosions became more and more intense. The black and white vortexes began to show signs of collapsing. What's going on? The path of life and death seems to be collapsing. Looking at the two whirlpools that were constantly swaying, many warriors in the square revealed looks of horror. The path of life and death was formed by the power of Dao Tai. It was basically impossible for anyone below the Sky Immortal Realm to collapse the path of life and death. But now, the path of life and death was collapsing. Who could have such terrifying power to cause the entire path of life and death to collapse from within? It should be the divine child, Yuan Hongwen. In this divine battle, only he has the power to collapse the path of life and death. If the collapse of the path of life and death is caused by Yuan Hongwen, then the first place of this divine battle will be Yuan Hongwen. A storm of discussion broke out. Everyone was speculating, and they were even more certain that Yuan Hongwen would be the first place of this divine battle. In the central divine palace, Do Hua nodded slightly. His eyes revealed a touch of satisfaction. Obviously, in his opinion, the only person who could cause the path of life and death to collapse was Yuan Hongwen. I wonder who it was that made Hongwen use such a terrifying power. Although he was satisfied, Do Hua was surprised. In his opinion, among the many warriors in this divine battle, there was no opponent who could make Yuan Hongwen use his full strength. Even Ji Chenyang could not. Thinking of this, Do Hua looked at Shi Ji, who was sitting cross-legged on a praying mat with his eyes closed. He thought of Zhuowen, who was taught by Shiji, and shook his head. Although Zhuowen's combat strength was not bad and even his talent was considered monstrous, Zhuowen's cultivation was only at the intermediate Earth Immortal realm. There was a huge gap between him and Yuan Hongwen, who was at the peak of the Earth Immortal realm. He did not believe that Zhuowen could make Yuan Hongwen use his full strength. As expected of the number one genius of the Primal Chaos Temple. I'm afraid only Yuan Hongwen, who was nurtured by the Divine Master, can cause such a commotion in the path of life and death. He Wushang suddenly laughed. As soon as he Wushang spoke, the other heavenly immortal patriarchs cupped their fists towards Do Hua and spoke courteously. Do Hua shook his head instead and said, "Everyone, you're too modest. Even if Hongwen has some strength, he can't be sure that he'll be the first to arrive. Perhaps he'll be one of the geniuses under your powers." Although Do Hua's words were extremely modest, his eyes were full of smiles. Clearly, he was in an extremely good mood. Naturally, he was certain that Yuan Hongwen would be number one this time. Everyone looked at Do Hua's appearance. Although they were speaking politely, they were secretly cursing him in their hearts. Of course, they naturally wouldn't say such words out loud. Whoosh! Suddenly, the sound of something tearing through the air came from the depths of the white vortex, immediately attracting everyone's attention. Someone came out. Is it Yuan Hongwen? Everyone's eyes were focused on the white vortex, their eyes filled with anticipation and speculation. Over 10 heavenly immortal realm experts stopped talking as well, and their gazes converged over successively. Even Do Hua looked over with a wisp of an indifferent smile on the corners of his mouth. Under the gazes of tens of thousands of people, a rather miserable figure suddenly rushed out and landed in everyone's line of sight. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Numerous gazes descended onto this figure, and then the entire square became extremely quiet. On the other hand, the smile on the corners of Do Hua's mouth slowly froze, and the gazes of over 10 heavenly immortals were stunned as well. Because this figure wasn't the godchild of the chaotic temple, Yuan Hongwen, as everyone had guessed, but Zhuowen. At the instant Zhuowen fell into the square, he spat out a mouthful of blood, and then he immediately retreated backwards and distanced himself from the white vortex. At the instant Zhuowen retreated to the edge of the square, the white vortex actually started to wriggle violently, and then it directly exploded with a bang, causing a terrifying wave of air to spread throughout the square. Crack! The square shook violently because of this, and countless cracks appeared on the ground. They were like veins on a leaf, and they spread out in all directions, causing it to seem extremely strange. This wave of air was too terrifying. The cultivators that were nearby directly spat out mouthfuls of blood when they came into contact with this wave of air, and they hurriedly retreated in astonishment while their eyes were filled with terror. They didn't dare approach the wave of air again. Bang! 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 Continuous explosions suddenly resounded, and the white vortex directly collapsed, exploding into countless balls of white light. A terrifying wave of explosion rippled out in all directions in a ring shape. After the white vortex collapsed, another figure rushed out from it. This figure had disheveled hair, and blood flowed from his forehead to his cheeks, causing this person to look exceptionally ferocious and terrifying. Everyone's gazes converged, and they were surprised to recognize that this person was the godchild, Yuan Hongwen. As soon as Yuan Hongwen came out, his expression changed slightly. He hurriedly avoided the powerful force produced by the white vortex's explosion, and retreated continuously. After Yuan Hongwen came out, numerous figures in a sorry state followed closely behind. The people in the lead were Ji Chenyang, Shi Bin, Kong Haogan, and the other representatives of the various holy talisman clans, followed by the other earthly immortal experts, who all rushed out with fear in their eyes. Do Hua frowned slightly, and with a clench of his right hand, a terrifying celestial core power burst out, transforming into a giant hand, and tightly grasped the collapsing white vortex. The white vortex, which was originally on the verge of collapse, immediately calmed down when it was grasped by the giant hand. Then, the giant hand suddenly collapsed into countless balls of white light, and merged into the white vortex, causing the collapsing vortex to be restored to its original state. The collapse of the path of life and death was completely stabilized by Do Hua's actions, and then figures rushed out from it one after another. As the figures continued to rush out, He Wushang's expression gradually turned gloomy, because he didn't see He Yu's figure. With He Yu's strength, she should have already walked out of the path of life, and it was impossible for her to not appear until now. When the 125th cultivator appeared at the exit of the path of life, no more cultivators appeared from the white vortex. It was obvious that the remaining 30 over people had died in the path of life and death. Do Hua glanced at He Wushang, and with a wave of his sleeve, he was about to seal the path of life and death, but he was stopped by He Wushang. Divine Master, can we wait for another hour? He Wushang took a deep breath, and suppressed the anger in his heart as he spoke. Do Hua looked deeply at He Wushang, and finally nodded. While waiting, Yuan Hongwen's gaze suddenly turned, and he looked at the edge of the square, at Zhuowen, who was sitting cross-legged, and there was a trace of unwillingness in his eyes. If it weren't for the fact that his injuries were too serious, he would have already rushed over to fight with Zhuowen again. Shi Ji, who was sitting quietly on the futon, slowly opened his eyes. He glanced at Zhuowen, and there was a look of admiration in his eyes. The path of life and death has ended, and now we can confer the title of the 99 chaotic war gods. I said before that the ranking of the chaotic war gods will be determined by the order of the exit of the path of life. Do Hua's voice was loud and clear, and it resounded throughout the square. Everyone's gaze involuntarily fell on Zhuowen, who was sitting cross-legged at the edge of the square. They knew that the first person to rush out of the path of life would be Zhuowen. Having said that, Do Hua waved his sleeve, and the ancient boulder standing in the middle of the square was suddenly lifted into the air, and it was suspended in the air. First chaotic war god, Zhuowen, carve your name into the ancient boulder. Only then will you be qualified to enter the primordial battlefield when it opens, Do Hua said faintly. Zhuowen suddenly opened his eyes, and slowly stood up. He took a step forward, and swept to the front of the ancient boulder. He cupped his fists at Do Hua, and then pointed his right hand. Celestial core power condensed at the tip of his finger, and his right finger slowly drew on the surface of the ancient boulder, carving his name. The moment Zhuowen's name was carved into the ancient boulder, Zhuowen realized that a mark swept out from the ancient boulder, and the mark fell deeply into Zhuowen's right palm. Zhuowen felt his palm heat up. Soon after, he saw a simple and unadorned character slowly appear in his palm. Upon closer inspection, the character was none other than the character Gu. With this mark, you will be qualified to enter the primordial battlefield when it opens. Do Hua took a deep look at Zhuowen, and then continued, Second chaotic war god, Yuan Hongwen, carve your name into the ancient boulder. Yuan Hongwen swept out. When he passed by Zhuowen, his gaze was extremely complicated, and he transmitted his voice to Zhuowen, Zhuowen, you and I will have a battle again. Once I comprehend that Dao intent, I will complete my transformation, and then I will not lose again. Zhuowen slowly landed on the ground, and he calmly looked at Yuan Hongwen's back with a solemn expression. Yuan Hongwen was very strong, and he was the strongest person he had ever met among his peers. If he had not used the power of the mysterious eyeball, he would have been the one to lose. Then, Do Hua began to sign up one by one, and the warriors were all excitedly carving their names into the ancient boulder. Among them, the third chaotic war god was Ji Chenyang, the fourth chaotic war god was Shabin, the fifth chaotic war god was Kong Haoqian, the sixth chaotic war god was Dong Chishin, and the seventh chaotic war god was Sichu Nyenyue. When the 99 chaotic war gods had all carved their names into the ancient boulder, Do Hua waved his sleeve and put the ancient boulder into his spirit ring. An hour had passed quietly. He Wushang, an hour has passed. Since He Yu has not come out, it means that he has died in the path of life and death. Do Hua glanced at He Wushang, and then he gave Dao Tai a look. Dao Tai suddenly roared, opened his mouth, and swallowed the black and white vortexes into his stomach. He Wushang's face was extremely gloomy. He silently looked at the path of life and death that disappeared into Dao Tai's mouth. He clenched his fists, and his eyes turned red. He coldly looked down at the 99 chaotic war gods on the square. Chapter 1806. The agreement. He Wushang's words caused an uproar in the square. There was no doubt that He Wushang's words were very bold. Although a heavenly immortal could use his own celestial core power to forcefully raise an earthly immortal's cultivation level, the price was very high. Ordinary heavenly immortals would not do so. However, He Wushang had actually offered such a generous condition in order to find out who had killed He Yu. It was obvious how important He Yu was to him. In the square, the 99 Chaos War gods looked at each other with hesitation. In fact, many of them knew who had killed He Yu. After all, Zhuowen had used He Yu's natal immortal artifact, the immortal slaughtering sword, when he fought with Yuan Hongwen. He Yu was dead and the immortal slaughtering sword was in Zhuowen's hands. There was no doubt that the murderer was Zhuowen. Whoosh! Suddenly, a figure rushed out from the 99 Chaos War gods. His target was the futon where He Wushang and Wei Wuyin were. Senior He, the one who killed He Yu, is Zhuowen. The origin of the god-slaying sword and the King Blade Saint talisman were all taken away by him. Senior He, you only need to search his spiritual ring and you will know the answer. The moment the person rushed out, his voice was loud and clear. Wei Rui. Yuan Hongwen frowned slightly and looked at Wei Rui, who rushed out with some displeasure. Despicable. Ji Chunyan's beautiful eyes narrowed as she said in a low voice with contempt. Wei Rui was extremely smart. The moment he mentioned the murderer, he rushed towards He Wushang and Wei Wuyin to prevent Zhuowen from taking revenge on him. Once he rushed to the side of Wei Wuyin and He Wushang, the two heavenly immortal elders, Zhuowen would not be able to deal with him even if he had hundreds of times the courage. Zhuowen's eyes were filled with coldness as he stared coldly at Wei Rui, who was rushing towards He Wushang and Wei Wuyin. His eyes were filled with killing intent. Zhuowen had always adhered to the principle of peace as long as others did not provoke him. If someone took the initiative to provoke him, Zhuowen would not let them off. Wei Rui's despicable attitude caused Zhuowen's heart to be filled with killing intent. Zhuowen stood up abruptly and took a step forward with his right foot. Invisible ripples spread out as he disappeared from where he stood and reappeared above Wei Rui. At this moment, Wei Rui was still several thousand meters away from He Wushang and Wei Wuyin. To him, this distance didn't even require half a breath's time. Unfortunately, Zhuowen was like a mountain, suddenly blocking in front of him. Wei Rui's pupils constricted as he abruptly stopped in his tracks. His gaze was fixated on Zhuowen as he revealed an expression of disbelief. Die. Zhuowen clenched his right fist, and the power of the holy physique of the small perfection surged out. At the same time, 9 golden runes lingered around his right fist and arm. They kept rotating, making the power of his right fist even more terrifying. Wei Rui's eyes were filled with fear when he felt the fierceness of the punch. He knew very well how terrifying Zhuowen was. Thus, he let out a shrill cry, and the eagle on his shoulder immediately grew in size. The eagle expanded to a height of several dozen meters, then landed at Wei Rui's feet. It lifted him up, spread its wings, and fled as fast as lightning. Senior He, great ancestor, save me. The moment he retreated, Wei Rui immediately asked He Wushang and Wei Wuyin for help. He didn't even dare to fight with Zhuowen. Wei Rui's fearful performance puzzled many warriors in the square. Most of them had been eliminated in advance and hadn't been able to enter the path of life and death, so they hadn't seen the earth-shattering battle between Zhuowen and Yuan Hongwen. If they had seen that battle, they would have been even more miserable than Wei Rui. Little bastard, how dare you! Wei Wuyin shouted angrily. He took a step forward and went straight for Zhuowen. He was a little anxious. After all, Wei Rui was the most outstanding descendant of their beast envoy clan. He couldn't die like this. The one who attacked with Wei Wuyin was He Wushang. At this moment, He Wushang's face was extremely gloomy, and the murderous intent in his eyes spread throughout his body like a vast ocean. Unfortunately, as soon as Wei Wuyin and He Wushang attacked, 2 figures suddenly tore through the air and descended from the sky, blocking Wei Wuyin and He Wushang. Wei Wuyin's expression changed slightly. He suddenly blasted out with his right hand, and then a surge of demon chi surged. He grunted and retreated continuously. Only then did he see clearly that it was a demon blade with monstrous demon chi that blocked his path. He Wushang was in a similar state as Wei Wuyin. He also retreated dozens of steps. What blocked He Wushang was a Buddhist commandment blade that radiated Buddhist light. This is a battle between the younger generation. How dare the two elders interfere? An indifferent voice rang out the moment He Wushang and Wei Wuyin were blocked. Afterward, Shiji, who was sitting on a cushion nearby, stared coldly at He Wushang and Wei Wuyin. He Wushang and Wei Wuyin shivered when they saw the cold light in Shiji's eyes. A trace of fear rose in their hearts. Shiji was a true immortal expert and the renowned fighting Buddha demon saint of the ancient times. An expert like that wasn't someone they could afford to offend. However, the two of them were extremely unwilling. After all, He Yu had been killed by Zhuowen, and Wei Rui was about to be hunted down by Zhuowen. How could the two of them let this matter go? Ah! Suddenly, a miserable cry rang out. Zhuowen had caught up to Wei Rui. Afterward, Zhuowen threw out a punch and directly blasted the eagle to pieces. Afterward, Wei Rui was lifted up by Zhuowen. Zhuowen, what are you doing? Hurry up and release Wei Rui, or you know the consequences. Wei Wuin's eyes narrowed as he could not help but shout out. Zhuowen turned around and glanced at Wei Wuin. He said indifferently, I, Zhuowen, have always been an upright person. This person used underhanded methods to plot against me. If I let him go because of this, would I let him plot against me again? With that, Zhuowen clenched his right hand and a violent force erupted. Wei Rui felt excruciating pain all over his body. Afterward, he exploded into a bloody mist while his soul was caught by Zhuowen. Wei Wuin's eyes widened in rage. He glared at Zhuowen and roared. He formed a seal with his right hand and a terrifying beast suddenly leapt out from behind him. As soon as the beast appeared, it roared at the sky and directly blocked the demonic blade in front of it. Then, it rushed towards Zhuowen. Shiji's eyes narrowed slightly. He snorted coldly and formed a seal with his right hand. Suddenly, the demonic blade expanded to several hundred feet in length and slashed across the air. The demonic blade let out a miserable cry and was directly chopped into pieces. Wei Wuin spat out a mouthful of blood. His face was extremely pale and his eyes were filled with fear. If you want to die, I'll fulfill your wish. Shiji's eyes were cold. The huge demonic blade released a terrifying demonic chi and directly slashed towards Wei Wuin. Wei Wuin's eyes were filled with madness. Just as he was about to use the beast envoy Saint Talisman, Do Hua appeared in front of him. Do Hua's right hand formed a claw and suddenly grasped. Surging celestial origin power surged out and turned into a huge claw that grabbed the demonic blade. Do Hua said in a low voice, Brother Shi, enough is enough. Wei Wuin sighed softly and hurriedly said to Do Hua, Divine Master, you have to uphold justice for me. Zhuowen is really too arrogant. He actually dared to kill the successor of my beast envoy Saint Talisman clan in front of everyone. He's really audacious. Do Hua's face was gloomy. He said, you shut up as well. Wei Rui was indeed in the wrong. If he hadn't taken the lead, this wouldn't have happened. This matter ends here. As he spoke, Do Hua waved his sleeve and the demonic blade left his hand and was taken back by Shiji. On the other hand, Shiji looked indifferently at He Wushang and said, You, still want to attack? He Wushang silently looked at the Buddhist commandment blade before him and clenched his fists. In the end, he returned to his futon, but the killing intent in his eyes was extremely dense. Wei Wuin silently returned to his futon as well. Wei Rui had been killed and Shiji had stood up for him, so he knew that it was utterly impossible for him to look for trouble with Zhuowen now. A trace of a mocking smile appeared on the corners of Zhuowen's mouth as he silently put Wei Rui's soul core away. Wei Rui's cultivation wasn't high, and he was only at the intermediate stage of the earthly immortal realm. So, even if his soul core was made into a soul core bomb, it wouldn't be of much help to Zhuowen. However, Wei Rui's soul core contained a trace of the beast envoy Saint Talisman's quintessence, and it was extremely beneficial to him. So, he naturally wouldn't let Wei Rui's soul core go. Zhuowen cupped his fists towards Shiji with gratitude in his eyes. Shiji had helped him twice, and according to the agreement, Shiji would only help him 3 times. In other words, Shiji would only help him one last time. Then, Zhuowen looked towards Dohua and said with a blazing gaze, "Divine Lord, according to the agreement, I've already obtained first place in the god battle. So, is it time for you to fulfill your promise to me?" Dohua took a deep look at Zhuowen and nodded, "Of course I'll fulfill my promise to you." At this point, Dohua looked towards Elder Jiyu, who wasn't far from the central divine palace, and said with a nod, "Elder Jiyu, I'll leave the rest to you." Elder Jiyu took a step forward and arrived in front of Zhuowen. "Take out your wife." Zhuowen looked excited. With a flick of his finger, he took out a crystal coffin from his spirit ring. His entire body was trembling slightly. The moment the crystal coffin appeared, many cultivators in the square revealed complicated expressions. They didn't expect that Zhuowen would risk his life to participate in the god battle and obtain first place, all for the sake of the woman in the crystal coffin. Ji Chunyan's beautiful eyes were even more complicated. She muttered in a low voice, "No wonder he worked so hard to obtain first place in the god battle. It was all for the woman in front of him. For this woman to have such a man who is willing to sacrifice himself for her, she should have no regrets in this life." At this point, Ji Chunyan's gaze towards Zhuowen changed, and the surrounding cultivators were also moved. Chapter 1807. Returning to the divine tomb, Yuan Hongwen's gaze also landed on the crystal coffin Zhuowen. He frowned slightly and shook his head with a sigh. "I never thought that Zhuowen would be such a sentimental person." Elder Jiyu carefully studied Mu Chunxue in the crystal coffin. After a moment of thought, he said, "Since the Divine Master has promised you, I will naturally do my best to treat you. However, your wife's body has already collapsed, and only her soul remains. Moreover, her soul is unstable and on the verge of collapse. It's not appropriate to treat your wife right now." Zhuowen's eyes narrowed. He said in a deep voice, "Senior Jiyu, do you need anything else?" Elder Jiyu nodded. "This crystal coffin should be used to stabilize this woman's soul, right? If this old man were to carelessly extract the woman's soul from the crystal coffin, her soul would immediately become unstable. At that time, even this old man would be powerless to reverse the situation. You need to find a physical body that can replace this crystal coffin. Moreover, this physical body must be stable enough. I believe that you also know the method to refine a physical body. However, the most important thing this time is to refine a physical body, the 9-soul lotus root. The chaotic divine temple does not have the 9-soul lotus root. I can provide you with the other materials, but I need you to retrieve the 9-soul lotus root for me." Zhuowen frowned when he heard that. He had never heard of the 9-soul lotus root before, so how was he supposed to find it? "May I ask where the 9-soul lotus root is located?" Zhuowen asked in a deep voice. "Legend has it that it grows in the divine tomb of the Nether Corp's forbidden grounds. There is a lotus pond there, and the 9-soul lotus root grows in the center of the pond. However, it belongs to the master of the divine tomb, so I'm powerless to retrieve it," Elder Jiyu said nonchalantly. Zhuowen's eyes narrowed. He never thought that the 9-soul lotus root would grow in the divine tomb of the Nether Corp's forbidden grounds. Moreover, it belonged to the master of the divine tomb. With Zhuowen's current strength, how was it possible for him to retrieve the 9-soul lotus root from a place like that? "Zhuowen, I'll bring you to the Serene Corp's extremity grounds. I happen to have something to do there, so come with me." Suddenly, Shiji slowly stood up. His eyes were like torches as he glanced indifferently at Elder Jiyu and Dohua. Zhuowen sank into thought when he heard that. He looked at Shiji's expression as well as Elder Jiyu and Dohua's. He knew that Elder Gu's request probably had something to do with Shiji. Zhuowen cupped his fists towards Shiji with gratitude in his eyes. Speaking of which, Shiji had done a lot for him, and now he was even willing to go to the Serene Corp's extremity for him. Haha, this Do is very grateful that Brother Shi is willing to make a trip to the Serene Corp's extremis. Dohua laughed and cupped his fists towards Shiji. "We're just taking what we need." Shiji's gaze was calm as he looked at Zhuowen. Zhuowen, let's go to the Serene Corp's extremity grounds together. Once we're there, I'll naturally help you obtain the 9-soul lotus root. With that, Shiji nodded at Do Hua. Brother Do, other than the 4 battlefields, your chaotic divine temple should also have an entrance to the Serene Corp's extremity grounds, right? Open it for us. Do Hua smiled, of course. Next, Do Hua led Shiji and Zhuowen into the central divine palace. Before they left, Zhuowen put the crystal coffin back into his spirit ring. His eyes were filled with tenderness. After Do Hua and the others left, Elder Jiyu said loudly, "It will take some time before the primordial battlefield opens. Once it opens, the 99 chaotic war gods will have the same qualifications as experts above the heavenly immortal realm. They will be the first batch to enter the primordial battlefield. After that, the primordial battlefield will open again. If anyone wants to enter the primordial battlefield, they will all have the qualifications to do so. Now, let's disperse." After Elder Jiyu finished speaking, he left the place. Then, more than 10 heavenly immortal patriarchs left the square with their disciples and returned to the accommodations arranged by the chaotic divine temple. As for those warriors who were not chosen as chaotic war gods, their eyes were filled with bitterness. Elder Jiyu had said that the primordial battlefield would open again in the future. However, they knew that by then, most of the good things in the primordial battlefield would have been taken by the first batch of chaotic war gods and heavenly immortal patriarchs. What good things would be left behind by then? The dark corridor seemed to be endless. Zhuowen quietly followed behind Do Hua and Shiji. His originally excited mood slowly calmed down at this moment. After walking for about half an hour, the 3 of them arrived at a large hall. However, Do Hua did not stay in the hall for long. Instead, he turned right and came to an extremely remote bookshelf. Do Hua quickly pointed his hands in front of the bookshelf and condensed strange runes in the air. Then, he muttered something. Creak. The bookshelf suddenly opened to both sides. Then, Zhuowen discovered that behind the bookshelf was a rather strange Dharma array. This Dharma array looked simple and unadorned. This magic formation can directly enter the small world where the Serene Corp's Extremis is located. It can also ignore the spatial barriers in the Serene Corp's Extremis, Do Hua said with a smile. Shiji nodded and led Zhuowen into the magic formation. He said, "Brother Do, let's start the magic formation now." Do Hua nodded as he muttered to himself. Then, he formed a seal with his hands and chanted something. Instantly, the formation exploded with a blazing light. Then, it turned into a huge white pillar of light that instantly enveloped Zhuowen and Shiji. Looking at Zhuowen and Shiji who had disappeared, Do Hua's eyes flickered. He sighed softly and said, "I hope that Shiji can persuade the master of the divine tomb to open the primordial battlefield this time. Without the Serene Corp's Extremis, the chances of success are slim." When Zhuowen opened his eyes, he saw a world of coffins. The Serene Corp's Extremis was filled with green mountains and clear waters. The mountains were like coiling dragons, and the mountain ranges were like serpents. Immortal mist filled the air, and waterfalls flowed down. Old trees towered into the sky, and their branches were like mist. Even the arrangement of the coffins was varied. Some coffins were directly embedded in the walls, some were placed on towering trees like bird nests, and some were floating in streams. Zhuowen looked around. Seeing this familiar scene, his heart was filled with fear. His gaze passed through the coffins and finally landed on the plateau-like tomb of the divine tomb. He knew very well that it was in the tomb of the divine tomb that he was forced to flee for his life by the tomb guards of the true immortal tomb in the east. If it weren't for the first mountain god, he probably would have died. Senior Shiji, there are 4 true immortal tombs and 1 divine tomb in the tomb of the divine tomb. The 4 true immortal tombs are all true immortals. Is the one in the tomb of the divine tomb really a god? Zhuowen looked at Shiji and asked. Zhuowen had always been very confused about whether the one buried in the tomb of the divine tomb was a god. Shiji shook his head and said, "I once said that there are no true divine transformation experts in the heavenly armor continent. Even the strongest, Cangjie, is a demigod who is infinitely close to the divine transformation realm. The one in the tomb of the divine tomb can only be considered a demigod. However, his injuries were so severe that he had no choice but to bury himself in the serene corpse extremis and slowly recover his injuries over the years. Speaking of which, I am actually much luckier than that old friend of mine. Speaking of this, Shiji's face was filled with sorrow and nostalgia. Obviously, Shiji knew the master of the divine tomb. Who is the master of the divine tomb? Xiao Hei landed on Zhuowen's shoulder and asked in a deep voice. Shiji glanced at Xiao Hei with a complicated look in his eyes. He shook his head and said, I can't tell you this. I have been to the serene corpse extremis before. That old friend of mine said that I cannot reveal his identity. This time, I will take you there and he will give you the 9-soul lotus root. Zhuowen's eyes narrowed and said, Senior Shiji, why are you so sure that the master of the divine tomb will give me the 9-soul lotus root? Shiji smiled and said, you will know when you get there. With that, Shiji waved his sleeve and immediately wrapped Zhuowen in it. They turned into a long rainbow and flew towards the depths of the serene corpse extremis. Shiji's domineering behavior naturally caused a commotion among many old monsters in the serene corpse extremis. Powerful divine senses swept out from various treasured lands and landed on Shiji. Humph! Shiji snorted coldly. An even more powerful divine sense gushed out and turned into a large net, blocking all the divine senses that swept out. A true immortal. He is a true immortal. Many surprised divine senses communicated with each other through divine senses. Then, these divine senses slowly withdrew into their respective treasured lands and no longer tried to probe Shiji. Shiji released his powerful divine sense and the aura of a true immortal. In the sky above the serene corpse extremis, he flew unimpeded and quickly flew towards the depths of the serene corpse extremis. Soon, he arrived at the center of the serene corpse extremis, the huge plateau. At the top of the plateau, white snow covered the plateau as if it was wearing a layer of white gauze. At the center of the plateau stood a huge and magnificent palace. In front of the palace stood a stone tablet that seemed to reach the sky. The surface of the stone tablet was engraved with dense and profound words. At the 4 corners of the plateau, there were 4 huge tombs in the 4 directions of the central palace. Although these tombs were not as magnificent as the central palace, they were much more luxurious and majestic than most of the burial grounds Zhuowen had been to along the way. 4 huge statues stood in these 4 tombs. These 4 statues faced the central palace and knelt on one knee as if they were worshipping the owner of the tomb of the god of sin. Zhuowen was no stranger to these 4 huge statues. They were the tomb guards of the 4 true immortal tombs. This plateau was the absolute core of the serene corpse extremis. It was called the tomb of the god of sin. The moment Shiji arrived at the plateau, the 4 tomb guards in front of the tombs of the true immortals in the 4 corners of the tomb of the god of sin seemed to come alive. They slowly turned their heads and stared coldly at Shiji and Zhuowen. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.